Okay. Welcome everyone to IONS and Friendly Favors, hosted by Sergio and his beautiful wife. Here at IONS, we're in the amphitheater here at IONS, and as you see tonight, we're discussing UFOs and consciousness with GrantCameron. And I've known Grant for quite some time now, and I gotta say to you folks, he's one of the most remarkable men I've ever met in my entire life. I've only known him for about 4 or 5 years, but he has touched upon the essence of what I believe the extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional intelligence is trying to tell us. I think he's going to be our key in the future for the whole UFO community as far as how we're going to interface with them. And I think he's touching upon some very amazing concepts, ideas, theologies. I mean, your methodologies, you're touching upon them all by explaining to us through your experiences and others' experiences how you perceive they are dealing with us on a human 3D level. And I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you for being my friend, number 2. And number 3, I want you all to really welcome Grant, because he came a long way to talk to you tonight, and he is absolutely going to blow your mind this evening. Good job.
I have her address, I'll send her a check. For those of you who know my story, I'll make it short, and I'm going to cut through some of the stuff because I want to get to the end. I've got some material that even happened this morning. I've been in this 40 years, UFOs. For 37 years, I basically was into sightings. I chased, as I'll explain, I chased the Canadian government, I chased the President of the United States, I actually talked to Dick Cheney, chased the intelligence agency, the head of the CIA, the top scientist in the CIA actually commented on the one book I wrote here. So I did all that. In February 26, 2012, I had what I call a download experience. Changed my life. That's basically the story I'm going to tell you, what happened after that download experience, how I completely went from nuts and bolts to consciousness. And Jerry Pippin, who's now unfortunately passed away in the last month, very famous sort of radio broadcaster, said to me, he said, "Grant, I can't believe you've gone over to the woo-woo side." And I said, "Well, Jerry, I'll tell you what. I didn't do it on purpose. I was teleported there. I had no choice but to go there. It happened like that." And so I'll just go through it, and we'll try to save some time for questions. I can talk very fast. I get very excited about this subject. I've got a book coming out. I think we've got this right away. I've got a book coming out called Consciousness, Inspirations and Downloads Where Good Ideas Come From. And I hope to have it ready for tonight. But when you're doing a book on inspirations and downloads and you somehow figure out how this is done, and I think we can now do this kind of stuff. We can now tap in. I have to keep rewriting the conclusion, and then more stuff will come, and I have to rewrite it again. So it wasn't ready, but this is the book that is about to come out, and it basically goes through all sorts of different inspirations. Just inspirations in modern music, rock and roll, inspirations in inventions, Nobel Prizes, scientific discoveries, books, movies, art, savants and prodigy, which is a very important subject, psychics and mediums through scientific investigation, inspiration through aliens, inspiration through ancients, inspirations through channeled entities, through automatic writing, meditation, inspirations to the dying and the grieving, inspirations through music of the spheres, and inspirations through psychedelic compounds, which is probably one of the key ones that I found that works. And one of the things I give you my sort of biases to start that I found in doing this research, and that's all I do 24 hours a day, is that the modern world says this idea that thing is random, everything is chance. And so I say, when you look at anything in this field, whether it's parapsychology, whether it's UFOs, you always have to, as far as I'm concerned, look at the first question. Is it pattern, is it chance? Is it separate particles banging into each other? Is the world a random process, and is it meaningless? Or is the world contained with oneness? Is it all connected? Does it run, if you looked at Rupert Sheldrake and people like that, is it run by patterns and habits? Is manifestation bringing forward what comes in front of us, and is the world meaningless or meaningful? So that's the first thing that I think that we have to. The second thing is the idea, we were talking at supper time about this, and this is this idea that part of the problem we have is the arrogance we have. And that we think that we are explaining things, we think we are inventing things, and I say, no, we're not doing either. This is the simplest thing in biology, it's the separation of the cell. And we say, well, we've explained this, it's just a little robot, and it just separates a cell. And I say, give your head a shake. I mean, you say that it just separates, a cell is composed of 100 trillion atoms. Not billion, not million, trillion atoms. And so when a sperm fertilizes an egg and it makes the first separation, that cell has to take the chromosomes from the father and the mother, split them evenly into two new nucleuses, and it has to source 100 trillion atoms, and it has to find them, it has to gather them together, it has to put them in the right order and in the right position, and then it has to add life, and it does that in 15 to 24 hours. And we say that's just the way it is. It's just a little machine. And we do that all the time. I see in science, we say that's placebo, that's just nature, that's just the laws of physics, and we sort of name stuff and we say that we explain it, and you're really not explaining anything. It's like the story of Moses going to the Red Sea. He takes his rod, he breaks the Red Sea, it opens up, the people go through, the Egyptians come, he closes the Red Sea with his rod. Nice story, how does he do the trick? Same thing here. We think that we're explaining things. All we are doing in nature is describing stuff. We aren't explaining anything. All we're doing is watching the process. We can get nature to do things. We can sort of manipulate nature, but it's nature that does it. All we are doing is watching. And that's one of the main things. And Thomas Edison sort of described it the way I think it is. We do not know 1/1,000,000th of 1% about anything. I absolutely believe that's true. We think we're just working to the last decimal place, and we've got it all figured out, and it's just a couple of little holes to fill in. Edison, I believe, was right. Mark Twain also said, 99 parts of all things that proceed from the intellect are plagiarisms, pure and simple, and that lesson ought to make us modest, but nothing can do that. And basically, that's my sort of thing. In the book, what I do is I'll look at three different, and I'm going to sort of skip over two of them. We're going to do the downloads and inspirations because it's the weird stuff, and it is much weirder than UFOs. When you hear some of this stuff, it's really, really weird stuff, and it's really dramatic stuff. The copycats, the biomimicry, there's millions and millions of dollars going into this. The science has started to learn that if you want to see something done correctly and the most efficient way, you look at science. And they know now that if you can figure out one simple system of how science, say, pumps sap up in 200 feet up into a tree without a pump, if you can get that, you make millions of dollars. So science is working on this idea of imitating nature. And the other one is accidents, serendipity. Some people have argued with me. I absolutely insist. If you look at synchronicities, or if you look at people who can predict the future, there really is no accidents. There are no accidental discoveries, although you'll see a number of things, stainless steel, potato chips. All these things were things that they were trying to invent one thing. Something happened in the lab, and they ended up inventing something completely different. These were sort of like accidents, and what they do is basically take credit for it, say we invented it, and they make a lot of money on it, and basically it's something that they had really no control. It just accidentally happened. And there's quite a few of them. LSD was one of the big ones. I'll say it'll go down in history as one of the top 3 inventions of the 20th century. And when you look at it, you see that the guy who invented LSD was having visions as a child. He was very, very sort of into this sort of thing. He had a voice talk to him when this thing happened, when he invented it. And you start looking at this kind of stuff, and you realize that it's not just accident. It is much more pattern. It's being able to tap into the system rather than manipulate the system. Jacques Vallée, this is this thing about synchronicity. I'll skip that. One of the things that when you're doing inventions you find is that the vast majority of inventions, and I'll just go through a bunch of them here, it's just page after page after page of inventions where we think that somebody invented it. For example, the telephone. Most people don't realize that Alexander Graham Bell filed, and 3 hours later someone filed the same patent, exactly the same thing. And they have found that the vast majority of, and this has been written about by a lot of people, the vast majority of inventions were invented in 3 or 4 places at the same time, which tends to indicate that it's there, it's in a field, And when the people get to that level where they're sort of talking in that sort of aspect, that a number of people will tap into the same invention at the same time. And the Nobel Prize Committee actually goes along with this now. You'll see a vast majority of, for medicine or physics or whatever, it's almost always awarded to 3 people, 2, 3 people. It's never awarded to one. They've actually admitted the fact that inventions happen simultaneously, that it's not usually one guy who comes up with it. Now this is my trail. I had a UFO sighting in 1975. On the far right here is Wilbur Smith, who ran the Canadian government UFO program. When I was in 75, I tried to publish a book on this small town that was inundated with UFOs, and I was there, and the publisher wouldn't publish it, said, Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff, count me among the unbelievers. And I said, that's it, forget the sightings, waste of time. And all I said is, I want to find out this object up here in the top. It was called Charlie Red Star. I saw it up close, and all I wanted to know is, what had I seen? Somebody had to be smarter than me. Someone had to know what it was. So I chased the Canadian government, and that's in some of my books. Dr. Eric Walker is the former president of Penn State University, had 14 honorary doctorate degrees, was chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis. He was an assistant secretary of defense. He was very good friends with Eisenhower, very, very powerful guy, and we chased him around for 8 years. He couldn't hang up the phone, and we were trying to get him to explain why the cover-up had taken place, how it all fit together. And then, of course, I went after the presidents, and I chased the Central Intelligence Agency, figuring that somebody at these very high levels had to know what was going on. And then my right brain conversion to the woo-woo-ville. This happened, and to give you an idea, what happened to me is exactly the same thing that happened to Edgar Mitchell. And I quote here from the IONS site. Traveling back to Earth, having just walked on the moon, Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell had an experience for which nothing in his life had prepared him. As he approached the Earth as we know it, he was filled with an inner conviction as certain as any mathematical equation he'd ever solved. And his download was that everything is connected. That consciousness is, everything is connected, the universe is one, it's all connected. That was his download. My download was very similar in content, but it had the 3 sort of things that a download has. It happens instantaneously. It happens like that. It doesn't happen, it's just quickly. It's like the near-death experience when someone has a life review. It happens like that. What would take years happens in seconds. That's what happened, and it filled with this sort of excitement, which when it happens, it's like you're just totally excited. And this one that I underlined is the most important one, that's the hardest to explain. When it happens, you are absolutely 100% assured. You know this is right. You do not have to put it in a lab. You don't have to check it. You know this is the answer. It comes with this absolute certainty, which Edgar Mitchell described and which I experienced. And it's very hard to explain to people, to get them to believe that it actually does have this absolute certainty part to it. Other downloads. I'll go through some others and then I'll describe mine. Now, some of these are kind of weird. This is one I put in because Sergio and his wife are sort of into art. This is a guy who believed that he was in contact with 40 different artists. And there are a number of these. There are hundreds of these people in the world, and they usually paint in the dark. This is a guy who's painting 2 artists, 2 famous artists at the same time. And this is, they have a word for it. But there are hundreds of these people in the world who can do this. And he's got his eyes closed, and he's basically
2 faces at once. A different artist in each hand.
So this is the kind of process that I say that people, we're getting help. We're not doing this ourselves. We're getting it from somewhere else. Here's one for the scientific people. The guy on the left is Fred Hoyle, who should have won 2 Nobel Prizes, except he disputed the theory of evolution, and he believed that life was coming on meteors, and the head of Nature magazine didn't like him. And the guy on the right is Richard Feynman, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics. Here's them talking about the download experience. This is they'll be talking about this very instant excitement, knowing it's right. And Feynman is talking about his discovery of supercooled liquid helium. He came up with this whole theory. So listen to them talk about the download experience.
After discussing working problems, it is natural that Feynman and Hoyle should savour that most thrilling pleasure of all, the moment of revelation.
You try all sorts of things and you're hopeful about trying it, Have you had a moment when in a complicated problem where quite suddenly the thing comes into your head and you're almost sure you've got to be right?
Oh yes, that's.
I mean, this is a great,
Oh God, yeah. And then you try to figure out what the conditions were of that moment that you can do it again.
Yeah.
For example, I worked out the theory of helium once, and suddenly saw everything. I was struggling for 2 years,
That's right.
and suddenly saw everything.
And
one
time
afternoon,
scale.
I can remember everything about it, by the way. It's psychologically
Yeah.
funny. You can remember the color of the paper you were writing on. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the room
Yeah.
and everything else. And then you wonder, what's the psychological condition? Well, I know at that particular time, I simply looked up and I said, wait a minute. It can't be quite that difficult. It must be very easy. I'll stand back and I'll just treat it very lightly. I'll just tap it and it'll say boom, boom, and there it was. So how many times since then I'm walking on the beach and I said, well, look, it can't be so complicated. I'll simply tap it, tap, nothing happens.
It only happens,
So the lights are great, but the secret way, what's the condition?
It's that missing bit in the brain, isn't it?
Right.
That suddenly lights up and...
Yeah, and I have no idea. I thought about it because some man
Can't
suggested
tell you
I
that.
think about that. Because if I could only figure out the formula for what condition to be in to get good ideas, I'd be much more efficient and more happy, you know. So I wasn't paying attention to what the condition is, and I've never found.
Now, Feynman should have known, because it was done back in the 1960s. Feynman did LSD. And one of the former directors here at IONS, James Fadiman, had done an experiment in 1966, the day they shut the LSD experiments down. And it was done with people here in California, with high-level scientific people, architects, and what they did was they would give them headset, they would give them eye covers, and the way you got into the study was you had to be working on a problem that you were absolutely stumped on, and you had to be working on that problem for 3 months. Otherwise, you couldn't get in. So they had these people who had this dying desire to solve a problem. They had 48 people in the experiment. They gave them 100 micrograms of LSD, and 44 of them instantly got the answer to what they were doing. And Feynman actually describes all the things that they were working on. So they were working on it for creativity. This was done in the 50s and the 60s, and it was the way to sort of straighten out the mind, to see things, to put things together, but it was very, very effective. And Feynman may actually have used this process because he was doing LSD at that time. Here's another interesting download. I did a lot with music. I've done a lot with aliens and music and this sort of stuff. Here's Bob Dylan talking about a lot of very famous, some of the most famous songs are, someone actually said if you write a song, the most famous songs are written in under 10 minutes. So here's Bob Dylan talking about where music comes from, where his very famous music, and he's in the top 10 of all times for musicians.
I'd read somewhere that you wrote Blowing in the Wind in 10 minutes. Is that right?
Probably.
Just like that.
Yeah.
Where did it come from?
It came from, it was like, right out of that wellspring of creativity, I would think. I don't know how I got to write those songs.
What do you mean you don't know how?
Well, those early songs were like almost magically written. Darkness at the break of noon, shadows even the silver spoon, handmade blade, a chop.
Child's balloon. And a lot of musicians, I've talked to a number of musicians, they'll all describe this phenomena, that they really don't know where it comes from. It comes in dreams. The book, The Wizard of Oz, came in an instantaneous download. Like mine, like Edgar Mitchell's, came instantaneously. Here's one of the big ones. J.K. Rowling's, all the books of Harry Potter. Here's where they came from.
Was a writer. Yeah, I wrote compulsively all through my late teens, into my 20s, but I'd never really found the right thing, you know. And then I was on a train, I was 25, and it came, and what came was, boy doesn't know he's a wizard, goes to wizarding school. Bang, bang, bang. And then that was it, and that was like touch paper, and I was on this delayed train going from Manchester to London, and my head was just flooding with what's at this wizard school. There are 4 houses, there are ghosts, there are house ghosts. What do they teach? What subjects do they learn? Who are the teachers? And I had no pen. And but that was it. That was it. I don't think I had ever felt so excited. I thought I'd love to write that.
This one is weird. 12 Steps and the 12 Traditions, the book for Alcoholics Anonymous. He had a download experience in 1934. He called out to God. He was being treated in a hospital with some sort of drugs. He has this sort of enlightening experience with the light and all this stuff, never drinks again. In 1950s, he writes the 12 steps and the 12 traditions, and in his writings later on, he reveals the fact that he got it off an Ouija board talking to a 15th century monk by the name of Boniface. When that happened, a lot of people in AA quit. I guess they figured, okay, we're going out to get drunk. They couldn't believe it. Yeah. And he had a seance room in his thing, and he even quotes, he talks about, throughout AA, we found a lot of psychic phenomena, nearly all of it spontaneous. Alcoholic after alcoholic tells me of such an experience and asks if this denotes lunacy. These psychic phenomena have run nearly the full gamut of everything that we have seen in the books. In addition to my original mystical experience in 1935, I had a lot of phenomenalism myself, and that was William Wilson, who was the co-inventor of the Alcoholics Anonymous tradition. Google, everybody uses Google, came in a dream. Here's a page describing how it happened. Hopefully, let's go. Maybe we're not gonna.
I have a story about following dreams, or maybe more accurately, it's a story about finding a path to make those dreams real. You know what it's like to wake up in the middle of the night with a vivid dream? And you know how if you don't have a pencil and pad by the bed, it will be completely gone by the next morning. I had one of those dreams when I was 23. When I suddenly woke up, I was thinking, what if we could download the whole web and just keep the links? And I grabbed a pen and started writing. Sometimes it's important to wake up and stop dreaming.
Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones came in the middle of the night. The main part of the song, and it was on a tape recorder. He put on. Most of these guys have tape recorders. John Lennon, all these guys. He had a tape recorder, and so he sings the bar of music. Ain't got no satisfaction, and the next thing you hear is him snoring. Yesterday by the Beatles, one of the most famous songs ever. Clearly, Paul McCartney said, came in a dream, he woke up, it was all there. He just sat at the piano in the room and quickly wrote it down. The Guess Who, this is where I come from, the famous Guess Who, American Woman. That song they played in 1968 in Mississauga, Ontario, and the head of the band describes the fact that somebody in the audience was taping it, and when they played it back, none of them remembered ever writing it, playing it, composing it, nothing. It was totally new to all of them, and they had played the whole song. Francis Crick, these are Nobel Prizes, confirmed to a friend that he was doing LSD when he discovered the double helix. That's where the idea came from. Oh shoot, now we're going to have computer problems here. Let's do it this way. Let's see if we can. Carey Mullis, who won the Chemistry Nobel Prize, was doing LSD. He said that he learned how to walk around inside a molecule, and he's the guy that won the Nobel Prize for duplicating DNA. He was asked, could you have done it without the LSD? And he said, no. He's also very famous because he's an alien abductee. He clearly talks about the fact that he goes to his cottage, Northern California, and encounters a glowing raccoon who says to him, good evening, Dr. Mullis. And 6 hours later, he woke up and he got his gun out, and he said, I'm going to find that little effer. I hope he's still in the outhouse. And he went looking for the, and then his daughter reported 3 hours missing time, and she came and she said, Dad, I think you should read this book. And she gave him the book Communion. And he's very open about the fact that he's an abductee, and that LSD helped him create his Nobel Prize. Charles Towns, who won the Nobel Prize for the laser, actually asked the question, which is very important, where do brand new human ideas come from? His came on a park bench, and this comes to this right brain, left brain thing that I'll talk about, that when you quieten down, they've actually made this into a statue. The other one that happened on a park bench was the other Nobel Prize, which was the invention of the hologram in 1964. It also occurred on a park bench. The guy was just sitting there watching people play tennis, and suddenly this whole idea of how it worked popped into his head. This is mine. Happened in 2012, happened February the 26th, happened exactly the same day that a very famous contactee by the name of Chris Bledsoe had his first encounter with what he calls the Shining Lady. And this is a message that he says he's been given to the world He's becoming sort of a famous abductee. He meets the Shining Lady on exactly the same day as I have my download experience. I'm watching Colin Andrews, who is the top crop circle guy in the world. I had no intention of going to lecture, had no interest in crop circles whatsoever. I just figured that he was a very famous person. I should pay him the respect of going in to watch him lecture. I went in to watch him lecture, and that's when it happened. He was talking about consciousness in crop circles. What his claim was that 20% of crop circles are created by aliens, the other 80% are hoaxed, and that the aliens are telling the hoaxed people how to do it. And he gave a number of examples, pretty convincing examples of how these people suddenly got ideas in their head, and it matched with people meditating in fields and asking for certain patterns, and this guy would put a certain pattern down. And anyway, he's talking about that. That's all I remember about the lecture. But the way this works is it's not that you get anything free. As I say, and you'll see me describe, your left brain has to gather the material. It has to do all the thinking. It has to go through all the work. When you've done that, when you relax, when you can shut down the left brain, when you can sort of go to that right brain state, then whether it's relaxing, whether it's meditating, whatever it is, then boom, it comes across. And that's what happened to me. I had worked on all this material in my life. I just didn't realize it all fit together. The one is a top secret government document from 1950 from the Canadians. The Canadians in 1950 go to the Americans, and they want to, through classified channels, they ask the Americans, what's the deal on flying saucers? What's really going on? Through classified channels, they get the answers back, and according to this top secret document, it's one of the few top secret documents on UFOs, American officials say the following. The matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States. Flying saucers exist. There's a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. Vannevar Bush was a science advisor to Roosevelt. He was in charge of all World War II programs. Atomic bomb, proximity fuse, plastic explosives, homing torpedo, everything. All that stuff, jet engine, he was in charge of it all. And they said he was in charge of a program, the UFO program, to figure out what was going on. The fourth thing was that the flying saucer subject was of tremendous significance to the Americans. That's what the Canadians were reporting in this top secret document. When this download happened, the document came into my head, but the very next line of the document, I had quoted this document numerous times, but it was the very next line of the document that came into my head instantaneously. And the following line says, and we were also told by American officials that other things might be associated with the flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. And the Americans aren't doing very well because they've said if we're working on it, they're willing to exchange credentials and work with us. So in 1950, the Americans tell the Canadians that mental phenomena is part of the UFO phenomena. That is significant because we now know that aliens are telepathic. We didn't in 1950. There were no abductees. Betty and Barney Hill would not appear until 1961. The first contactees that say they were talking to aliens would not appear until about 6 days after they detonated the hydrogen bomb. There was nobody in 1950 talking to aliens. And yet the Americans knew somehow that mental phenomena was part of the flying saucer phenomena. That was the first thing that popped in my head. The second thing that popped into my head was this guy, Dr. Eric Walker. We had chased him for 8 years. He indicated he knew what was going on. During one interview, he was being confronted about the control group, which is known as MJ-12. The name has probably changed. He was asked, Dr. Walker, what about MJ-12? Are there still just 12 people on the committee, and are they still all just Americans? And Walker says to him, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And the guy in Great Britain had no answer. So Walker answers his own question. He says, look, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in. And they're talking about the control group, the group that runs it. Unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in. Very few people understand about it. So that's the second. That's 1991. The third thing that popped into my head is this. UCLA, engineering alumni, Ben Rich, who runs Lockheed Skunk Works. SR-71, U-2 spy plane, stealth fighter, drones, all that was Lockheed Skunk Works. He was the president of Lockheed Skunk Works. He gives a lecture at UCLA to the engineering alumni. The very last slide, 1993, March 1993, the very last slide he shows is a flying saucer. And he makes this famous statement, we now have the technology to take ET home. And everybody laughs, except for 3 ufologists who are in the room. And they go, what? And they look, and so after the lecture ends, he shows this slide, everybody comes up, there's about 25 people asking him questions. Ben Rich says, we have the technology, it's not going to take a lifetime to do. We've discovered the mistake in the equation. And he said, but it'll take an act of God to get this thing out of Congress because it's so deep black. One of the people that was watching it was Jan Hartson, who's now the international director for the MUFON, the biggest UFO group. Jan Hartson had an experience when he was 9 years old in his backyard. His brother came and said, someone's trying to get in the window. They go out in the backyard, there's a flying saucer sitting there. 30 feet away, he looks at this thing, and he had always wanted, he and his brother were trying to build a flying saucer. So here's this flying saucer. He tries to get a camera. He's missing time. When he comes back in the house, he's missing an hour and a half. His whole life, his whole engineering career is dominated by this event. He wants to know how UFOs repel. Ben Rich is heading for the door. Questions are over. He runs after Ben Rich as he's going out of the building. He said, Ben, I saw this UFO. I'm fascinated. I need to know. I've spent my whole life. I need to know. How does the propulsion system work? How do they get here? And Ben Rich turns around and he says, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And Jan Hartson said, I didn't realize there was going to be a question coming. So he said, well, it means everything in time and space is connected. And Ben Rich said, that's how it works. Gets in his car and drives off. So those are the three things that popped into my head. Very high-level officials. The head of Lockheed Skunk Works, a guy who was very good friends with President Eisenhower, head of the biggest, one of the biggest engineering colleges, and the Canadian government, all saying the same thing. It's ESP, it's consciousness. This is a key to the whole thing. When that happened to me, I was just like, wow. It was like certainty that this is right, and it all came in an instant. So the UFO connection, here's the UFO connection, which comes down when you get into quantum physics. You have a situation in quantum physics, and this is called the entanglement experiment. It was proposed by Einstein in the 1930s. This is a NASA slide, and basically it tells the story that if you take a particle, take a photon or take an electron, and these particles are entangled, you can move them through space. One can be on one side of the universe, one can be on the other side of the universe. If you change the spin of this one will instantaneously change its spin to balance. No time and space requirements, nothing. Instantaneously. And so what this comes down to is you say, you grab this one and this one says ouch, which means this one is aware of what you did to this one. Awareness is consciousness, which tends to indicate that consciousness is at the atomic level, that everything is conscious. And this is an experiment which has been run a number of times and nobody really doubts it. So if you take this entanglement type experiment and you extend it to UFOs, you take a look. If everything's entangled in the universe, if we detonate an atomic bomb, if everything is entangled in the universe and connected, will the rest of the universe know we detonated an atomic bomb? Absolutely. So that leads to the fact that when we detonated an atomic bomb, suddenly we got infiltrated by UFOs. That's when the modern UFO age started. There was some before there, and there was a pattern of weird things happening before, but nothing compared to after we detonated the atomic bomb. This is a photograph that was given to me by a Japanese journalist by the name of Maria Yude. The guy just died who took this photograph. He was a Marine. This is Nagasaki Harbor a couple weeks after they detonated the atomic bomb in Nagasaki. This is looking over the harbor. You will see an object up in the top right-hand side. Here's a close-up of the object. It's clearly a flying saucer. It's clearly a round object. This is August of 1945. So you can see that when we detonated the atomic bomb, they were there. They were watching. There was a number of these photographs taken, and the guy said that he didn't want them. He didn't want them released, and he's since died. And there's a whole series, 300 photographs, and a number of them have UFOs in them. This is the best of the bunch. So you can see this connection to nuclear weapons. And the other question is, if you have entangled objects, if you can move information across, and now we can do molecules, if you can go like this with a molecule or a particle, if you can sort of move things, then the question is, can you, if everything's entangled, can you take a flying saucer in this part of the universe and just move to this part of the universe? It would seem to indicate that that's a possibility. This is one of the main things I started working on once I gave up on the sightings, once I gave up on sort of the government. Although I didn't give up on the government, but I just sort of found this more fruitful. What I said is, if you watch lights in the sky, what can you tell? It's fast, there's green ones, how many green ones, how many fast ones, how many slow ones, how many fast, this, that, whatever. But you really don't know what you're looking at. I mean, you really don't know what's going on. It is not until you talk to somebody who's been inside the craft or who's talked to whoever's flying those craft that you're ever going to learn anything. And these are called experiencers. They're called abductees, experiencers. We usually call them experiencers. There's a group called FREE, which Edgar Mitchell is on the board. He's one of the members of the board of directors of this group. And it's the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. They took a poll, and the poll is a scientific poll, And they're now in segment 2, and then they're going to go to segment 3. I agreed to be one of the interviewers on segment 3, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk to people who have answered question number 54. Question number 54 says, do you believe that you possess information about advanced technology, advanced physics, or other scientific information that you've never read or learned in your normal environment? Out of the 1,014 people, out of the people who answered the question, 43% of them said, yep, I've got it. So the question is...
That's the definition of noetic knowledge.
Is that right, eh?
Basically, noetic
Wow.
is to know without studying.
Without studying. Okay.
Know it.
Wow, exactly. So that's it. Maybe Edgar made up the question. Maybe because Edgar was involved in this. So you have this situation that the Roper poll taken in 1991, 1992 said that 2% of people in America exhibit characteristics of being experiencers, which would make it like 6.5 million people. If you got 6.5 million people who have had encounters with aliens and 43% of them have got downloads, you've got literally millions of people who are walking around with information, and I'm going to show you some of that information. I've got a medical researcher. I can't expose these people because their careers is over if they do. He has got, and there's no doubt about it, he said this came from aliens. Absolutely came from aliens. His daughter is a friend of mine. She's also a medical doctor. She lives in my city. That's how I met him. He was given an invention to encapsulate viruses. AIDS virus, any type of virus. They will encapsulate the virus and the virus dies. He's working on it right now. I know which university he's working at. They're in stages of producing stuff. That was given to him. I have a NASA engineer who said to me, I got an idea one morning. The last thing I remember in the middle of the night was a hooded figure standing at the end of my bed. And the next morning he said, I woke up, I had this idea in my head. I suggested they put an experiment on the space shuttle. They said they're not going to put it on. It's a totally stupid idea. It'll never work. He insisted, and he got a scientist to sign off and put his name on instead. They did it. It worked. I can't tell you what the invention is because it would expose who this guy is. He and his colleagues sold the business for $100 million. That was given to him, he said quite clearly. The only thing he knows is there was a hooded figure before he had that idea. So you get that. This is a Cuban lady. I'll show you this. This is a Cuban lady, 59 years old, who's getting all sorts of mathematical downloads, symbols. Here's one. It's very interesting. You'll see these orbs, and I'm going to show you one later with a cancer cure. You'll see these orbs going through her bedroom, and she's got these on the internet. You can look at these things, and they're getting like 35 hits. They've been on for a year. Nobody's watching these things, but she's got piles of these things, of these orbs flying around, and I'll show you this later on from another one from my city, which is very, very dramatic. This is what she's getting. If you remember the Reynolds from Force case, Jim Peniston gets this download. He touches the craft. He gets this binary thing. She's got the same thing. She got the binary thing. It's giving locations around the earth. They decoded all this sort of stuff. She's getting these things. She's getting this writing here. She's getting this writing here. Nobody knows what it means. She's got this as a foreign language. She's getting foreign languages as well. Formulas. This is a girl, the NASA engineer put me onto her. She is able to predict things in the future. This is one of the things. She's an experiencer who suddenly was able to predict things and able to tell people, see you and say, you got something wrong with your kidney and stuff like that. This is the one she described to me with the mountains in the background. 2 high-speed trains in China are on the wrong track and they collide on top of a high track. And I found the photograph. She's a fellow who actually, this one you have to use a mirror to see it. It's backwards. You need a mirror to read it. Here's another one from the Cuban lady, 59-year-old Cuban lady, mathematical formulas that she's picked up. Nobody's been able to write it. And there are literally hundreds or thousands of people who are getting these mathematical formulas. And the question is, why are they getting it? Somebody's helping us for some particular reason. Cancer. Here's the cancer one. This happened in my city. This just happened. And this is pretty dramatic. This starts. There's 2 experiencers who tell this story. And one is Suzanne Chancellor, who runs a website called Random Alien Brain Droppings. She's 9 years old. She's with the aliens, a tall gray alien, which is this one. He's wearing a thing around his neck. He's got the long cloak on. And he tells her cancer is something you use every day. And then she said, as soon as he said that, this formula started to come out of the wall. A 3D holographic formula started to appear out of the wall. And she said it was so big and it was so holographic that she thought you could actually walk around this formula. It was like a molecule. You could actually walk around it. I won't play the clip, but that's basically her story. I put the other one together. The other one is Brett Oldham. He lives in Las Vegas, Nevada. She lives in Rhode Island. They've never met each other. I put them together. He is on board the ship, and we're going the wrong way here. Hang on. And you'll see on the ship, on the far right-hand side, you'll see this image that's shown to everybody who's an experiencer. They all are shown the screen of the environmental damage of the Earth. It's very nice, and then it gets worse and worse, and then they see the world blowing up and all this kind of stuff. And every experiencer is shown that, if you get deep enough into the regression. So he's had that, but he has the same experience, where he's sitting there, and they show him the screen with all the environmental damage, and he says to the tall alien, he said, "You're not going to let that happen. I don't believe it. You're not going to let that happen." And the guy went, "Oh, okay." And then he took him into the room, and suddenly the same thing, this 3D holographic image starts to appear, and he says, on your Earth, you have a disease called cancer. And Brett said, "Yes, we do." And he said, this is the answer to it. And he went, "What?" And he figured, like, he didn't like the grays, so he said, "Now it's been worth all the pain." And he said, Can I get something to write it down on?" And the alien said, "No, you can't write it down. You can only remember it." And he said, "Well, I want to write. I'm not good at math. I want to write it down." And he was told, "No, you have to remember it. We can't let you write it down." And he got so upset that they actually let him out of the room. So here's two experiencers, and I've actually offered to put them together, put up the money to put them together to see if the formula matches. And so far, we haven't been able to pull it off. But this is the kind of stuff you get when you get these downloads, where you get things where they absolutely match. They're both describing the alien with the cloak, with this thing around there, and there's no doubt they're talking the same thing. So you saw the woman with the orbs flying around her bedroom. I have a guy in Winnipeg who I met in the last year. He has these orbs, and he's seeing stuff in the sky. He's got infrared film, and he's filming the stuff in the sky. And I went, "Let's meet this guy. What the heck's going on here? I didn't know this was going on." He's filming in his room. Here's an orb. Here's a big orb. This just happened last week. He sends me the picture of the big orb. And here's one that's very important. There's a blue light coming down from the ceiling. When I show you the film of this object, it's going to come down this white wall. You may see it, you may not. It'll come to the bottom, but then you see it very clearly, and you'll see what happens. What happens is, here's his picture. The same thing as the woman, not quite as clear because he's in a dark room, and you can see these orbs. They're flying around the room, and he sent me piles of these videos of these orbs flying around in his bedroom. So what happens is, March the 1st, he phones me up in February, and he says, "Grant," he says, "I can't believe it. I think I got cancer." And I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I think I got cancer. I got this tumor on my neck." I went to the doctor, and the doctor treated him and gave him penicillin. The swelling didn't go down. So the way it works in Canada is it's free, and what they do is they triage you. So if they think it's very serious, you go to the front of the line. He went right to the front of the line. They moved him in Cancer Care Manitoba, where nobody wants to go. He's in Cancer Care Manitoba. They do the biopsy, the first biopsy. It's inconclusive. So they say, "We're going to do another biopsy on Tuesday. We're going to use a CAT scan. We're going to do a second biopsy." And they schedule the operation to remove the tumor. He says it's getting bigger and bigger. It's moved around from the back of his head. It's up here. It's pushing into his ear. Then Saturday night, he's filming, 1 o'clock in the morning, and here's what happens. You'll see it first fast, and then you're going to see it. You're going to see it very slowly. Here it comes, goes up and into his body. Now we'll show this slowly, and you may be able to see it come down the wall. I'll tell you when it comes down, if you can see it. There it goes, down the wall. Okay, so it gets to the bottom, and he's embarrassed because he left his clothes there. And it shows up on camera. So you'll see this object getting bigger, bigger. It's coming. And it goes up, and then down into his body. And I had to cut out the sound because he said some Canadian words that little boys and girls in America shouldn't hear. And he was just traumatized. I mean, well, not traumatized, but he was just like, he couldn't believe this had happened. He didn't go to sleep till about 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock Sunday morning. Wakes up at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. He goes to the bathroom, and he says something's weird. And he goes, and the whole tumor's gone. Everything's gone. So Tuesday he goes into the biopsy. He goes to the oncologist, and he says to the oncologist said, "What's happened?" And he said, "It just went away." He didn't mention the orb or nothing like that. He said, "It just went away." And he said, "What do you mean it just went away?" He said, "Well, Saturday night it just went away." And the guy said, "That's the most incredible thing I've ever seen in my life." And so they do the biopsy, and they do the operation right away. and they have to take out 4 lymph nodes because the tumor was pushing against the lymph nodes and they were dead. They take out 4 lymph nodes and take out a small mass, no cancer. So this is the kind of stuff that you see, and this is pretty clear that this guy has this sort of experience, but it's the same sort of thing. These pictures of orbs are becoming more and more common. Now this is one of the key things to consciousness, is when you take a look at aliens, one of the key things we know about aliens is that the only difference between us and them is all aliens are telepathic. They're right-brained. They're completely right-brained. So let's skip along here, because I want to get to the end. I want to get to some important work that was done by some of the friends of IONS. Meeting after the meeting, I suddenly get this download. I think I've got the wheel. I've solved every problem in the world. I've got this all under control. And I give a meeting, and I come to a woman who talks to me, and they set up this private meeting in Phoenix with this woman. She comes, and she's telling me all this stuff, and I'm listening, whatever, you know. And then all of a sudden she says, and I was flying the ship last night. And I went, what? I said, you're flying the ship? And she said, yeah. I said, the flying saucer? She said, yeah, I've flown 3 different models. I said, they let you fly the flying saucer? She said, yeah. I said, well, how the heck do you fly a flying saucer? And she said, you do it with your mind. And as soon as she said that, I realized why they set me up with this woman. She said that's how they propel it. And I didn't know this. I'm totally stupid. I mean, I didn't know this. Within a year, I had 24 people, mostly women, who had told me the same thing. They would say they were flying something, and I would say, you're flying this thing, how do you do it? And nobody said anything different. They all said, with your mind. So I always talk about the good aliens and the bad aliens, and I say, well, if there's good aliens and bad aliens, if there's bad aliens, why are they letting women fly the ship? I mean, in Saudi Arabia, if you're a woman in Saudi Arabia, it's illegal to drive a car. But if you're in a Saudi Arabian woman, you get abducted, they'll let you fly the ship, no license, no insurance, nothing. They'll just let you fly a ship. So here's a key one. This is the rat brain experiment. I'm going to show you 2 short clips. You can find this on the internet, the entire one. And this shows you where this thing's going. If you're looking at U.S. military technology, this is where it's headed. And we have this idea of evolution, that we're so smart, we have 100 billion neurons, and we can do all this kind of stuff, and you need this evolution, and the big brain, and whatever. This guy takes 25,000 neurons from a rat brain. Not 100 billion, no 100 million years to evolve or whatever, and this rat, 25,000 neurons from a rat brain, flies a simulator. So here's it's happening at University of Southern Florida, and it involves the rat.
The electrodes, these small black circles, would be in direct contact with the neurons, the lighter specks.
Within the first few days, what you will see is these cells begin to send out projections to their neighbors and gradually begin to connect, and the network literally becomes alive.
He couldn't believe it. He had created a working brain. And because he plugged straight into the neurons, he could do more than just record brain activity.
In fact, this is a two-way system where the electrodes not only allow you to listen to the conversation among the neurons, but you can also stimulate those neurons.
Put out the carrier signals.
They have electrodes wired into this petri dish.
Watch carefully. A tiny part of a rat's brain was actually flying a flight simulator in a thunderstorm. Wait till you see what this homegrown concoction can actually accomplish. Professor Thomas DeMorse is a biomedical engineer at the University of Florida. He wanted to push neuron research beyond anything that had ever been attempted before.
And so the basic idea is you get these neurons, he takes these neurons, and within 3 days the neurons are talking to each other, they're interacting with each other, and they're actually can send signals, and they'll send signals back. So it's not any sort of evolution type thing, it does it in 3 days. From just simple neurons to creating a brain to flying the simulator. This is 300,000 rat neurons that are driving this little robot around, and is done with remote control, sending signals to these neurons, and this thing's driving around and it's going in different directions. It's done with 300,000 neurons of a rat brain. So you can see that it's the neurons that are doing it. It's not anything else. The power, it's like the cell that I showed at the beginning, the split of the cell. It's a pattern. The neurons know what to do. They can interact with each other. It's got nothing to do with the humans. It's the neurons, and it's whatever system powers the neurons that works this whole thing. I'm her biggest fan in the world. This is Jill Bolte Taylor. If you want to know how the brain works and how we link into the non-local mind, Jill Bolte Taylor was a neuroanatomist at 37 years old. She had a left brain hemorrhage, shut down her entire left brain. And she clearly describes the fact of what happened. She was going left brain, left brain, right brain, and then the left brain shut down. That's your analytical side of the brain, your rational side of the brain. And she describes being in her right brain for 5 weeks. And she wrote a book called Stroke of Insight. She was named one of the top 100 people influential people in the world in 2008, and she says everything in my visual world blended as the left brain was shutting down. She couldn't tell where her fingers were, where her fingers ended and where the world began. And she said she started to get bigger, and she flowed in mass together as one. Everything was starting to move. My conscious mind felt so detached from my physical body that I seriously believed I would never be able to fit the energy of me back inside this skin. She sort of filled the entire universe and wondered how could she ever get back in her body. And she says, I believe the experience of nirvana, and that's what Edgar Mitchell experienced, exists in the consciousness of our right hemisphere. My stroke of insight would be, peace is only a thought away, and all we have to do is silence the voice of our dominating left mind. And this comes to this idea that it's your left brain, that is your conscious mind, and the right brain is in contact with the non-local brain, and that whatever you're using, whether you're using meditation or whether you're using psychedelic drugs or whether you're using pain or whether you're using a near-death experience or whatever it is, you basically get the password that moves you to the right side, and that's linked into the universal consciousness, and you can pull the stuff back. And that's how I believe it's happening. We on the other hand, in the world that we have, believe the old paradigm. We, like before 1800, we believed that the world, all the world was what we could see. And if you said that microwaves and radio waves and UV and X-rays, people would say you're nuts. You can't measure it, it doesn't exist. So that was before 1900, and the visible spectrum we now know is basically zero. What we actually see of the visible spectrum is zero, because if the spectrum goes infinitely in both directions, big waves, small waves, it's infinite, and what we see is literally zero part. It's just a little tiny segment. And so we would say the conscious brain, the left side brain, and you would have all this other stuff. We'd naturally say, well, there's other parts of the consciousness. You have dreams, you have near-death experiences and stuff. But the modern world says, no, there's just nothing. All there is this consciousness. And it's like, give your head a shake. It's almost like this sort of thing where, the guy says, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. Where it says, okay, then a miracle occurs. And that's basically what they're doing. It's sort of like they just say, well, it's placebo, it's just nature, it's just evolution, and it's like, nice story, tell me how the trick is done. So here's this, I'm going to sort of skip over this. I'll go to this thing. This is basically what has been determined, and what happened was, this came through epilepsy. If it hadn't been for epilepsy, we would never have learned this thing. And that was that there's a right brain, there's a left brain, and because epilepsy in the 1940s, they started cutting the corpus callosum between the brain of these people who had epilepsy. And it would stop the epilepsy, but it would also stop the right and the left brain from communicating with each other. And that's when we started to learn what the right brain does and what the left brain does, because you could actually talk to one brain and the other brain. So the left brain is the ego brain. It believes in separateness. It's rational and analytical. That's where all the language centers are. On the right side cannot talk. The right side of your brain cannot talk. Only the left side can talk. And you have this, it's detailed, it's finding details, it deals with the past and the future. The right side is here and now. And the weirdest thing was V.S. Ramachandran, who was a big neurosurgeon, made this joke about asking the split brain person. He said to the left brain, if I'm talking to you and your brain is split, if I'm talking to you, I'm talking to the left brain. He said, is there a God? And the guy said, no, there's no God. And then he asked the right brain, and the way you talk to the right brain is to get the left hand, because the right brain runs the left side, the left brain runs the right side. So in order to talk to the right brain, they asked the left hand to point to something. So they say, is there a God? And immediately they said, yes, there's a God. So he made this joke about, oh, wow, the one brain believes in God and the other brain doesn't. And that's basically what it comes down to, is the one is the self. It believes, I'm here, I'm separate, it's you versus me, and the other side believes it's all one. We're all connected. It's a theist brain. So Dr. Diana Powell, who has spoken and is very sort of spoken for Sergio, described it this way. Left brain is believing in a separate individual, it's objective, and the right brain is the sense of unity with a higher power. The right brain is your one that can link into the spirit or into the consciousness. Jill Bolte Taylor describes it. Left brain, separateness, ego, right brain is oneness and interconnectedness. I'll skip these experiments. But basically what they would do is they would sort of let a split brain person, they would tell them to look at certain objects. And what would happen is if they gave an item, if you're looking, they tell them to look at the dot. So if an object is shown to the left eye, it comes into the right brain. The right brain can't talk. So what they would do they would send a signal and say, get up and walk. And what would happen is go to the right brain, the guy would get up and walk. Then they would ask the guy, why did you get up and walk? Well, now you're talking to the other side of the brain. You're talking to the left brain. And the guy would, every single time, would make an excuse, said, I got up to get a Coke. Or they would say the left arm goes numb, and they'd say, how come your left arm is like in a stroke? How come your left arm is moving? Not my arm. And it always had this thing. And the important part was they just discovered that there was a storyteller. In the left brain, there is what's called a storyteller. And what it is if you have two scientific facts, the role of this storyteller, which is confirmed by all neurologists, they don't deny this, they just don't say it's all that significant, is that it will make the story consistent. So you have two facts, it will fill in the middle, but basically it just makes up stuff. And so what happens to me in terms of skepticism, this is why I believe skepticism happens, is because if you believe in the physical universe, you believe there's nothing paranormal, you've got your world all nicely settled, and then suddenly it comes along, you've got like your Berlin Wall, it's all nice and solid, and then someone comes and says, well, I was abducted, I was elevated out of my bed, I was floated through the roof, and suddenly, kaboom, you got a big hole in the wall. Suddenly your worldview has got a big hole, and that's the job of the left brain storyteller. It has to fill the hole. It's the one that guards the wall. It says, okay, you hallucinated. And then what they found very interesting, and this is something that applies to all parapsychology research, is that once the left brain storyteller makes up a story, it is like the concrete that holds the bricks together, and you do not move it. This is the old idea, you can't teach old dogs new tricks, and this is how the left brain storyteller, once they mix up a story, it does not back off the story. This is one of the experiments that was done to show this in 1931. University of Michigan, they got these two ropes. They say, tie the two ropes together. They give them three different things. They give them a pole, they give them an extension cord, and they give them a pair of pliers. What they do is they say, okay, you got to get the rope, tie them together. So everybody has the pole, they know, pull the rope over, tie it together. The extension cord, they tie it onto the rope, they pull it over, and they tie it. Nobody used the pliers, nobody. And so the guy comes in, Meyer comes in, and he walks through the experiment, and he pretends he's accidentally bumps the one rope, and the rope starts to swing. Within 45 seconds, everybody had tied the pliers to the rope and made it a pendulum and made it come over. So at the end of the experiment, Meyer goes to them and he says, why did you do what you did? So they explained what they did, and they said, why did you tie the pliers to the rope? And nobody realized that he had bumped the rope. Nobody recognized that he had done this. They all said, well, I saw monkeys swinging through trees. I saw myself on a rope when I was a kid swinging across. It just popped into my mind. And Meyer said, well, I just want to let you know, we bumped the rope. And then everybody tied the pliers. Nope, had nothing to do with me. It's not why I picked it. Nope, nope, nope. And he could not move anybody off their position. Everybody said that had nothing to do with anything. And so that's the idea that once the left brain makes a story, once the storyteller makes a story, it's not moved. This is even more dominant example. 1976, they run an experiment in a mall. They put 4 pairs of socks, identical socks. But they tell the people, and they say, we want you to look at these socks, and we want you to tell us which is a better pair of socks, which implies that there's something different with the socks. So everybody goes and they check the socks, and what they find is the right-hand pair of socks, 4 times as many people pick the right-hand pair of socks as the left-hand pair of socks. The last one they pick up is the one that they say is the best pair of socks. So they ask them, why did you pick those socks? And they say, well, the texture was better, the color was better, and they make up all these things. And then the guy would say, well, we just want to let you know, 4 times as many people picked up the right-hand pair of socks. Nope, had nothing to do with me. That's not why I picked it. I picked it because the color was better. And then, of course, they told them all the socks are the same. So that's the thing, is once somebody's got an idea, it's very hard to move them off that idea. And it works with the brain. Now we'll get into the non-local stuff. What I found, and this is basically what it comes down to. All experiences, whether it's UFO abduction, remote viewing, all this stuff is right brain. You check it, it's all right brain stuff. That's how it is. You cut the left brain, it's not you're going anywhere. Aldous Huxley said in the 1960s, he said, the left brain is creating a filter. That's what's going on. You have consciousness, you have a conscious mind on top of it, and the conscious mind you need. You need fear. You need to to be afraid if there's ice. You need to be afraid that if you go into the bush, there might be a bear in there. You need that fear. You need that conscious mind. And once you block off that conscious mind, then you go into the non-local mind, which is in touch with everything. If, for example, let me give you one with remote viewing. When you see remote viewing, when they do remote viewing, it has to be an absolutely blind target. So what they would do is they would take a blind target, just a 6-digit number, and they'd say, this is the target. It's completely blind, it has no hints. What would happen is if you were to give the person and say, okay, here's the target, it's a target in Egypt. As soon as you say that, the left brain storyteller goes, I know what it is. It's the pyramid. It's going to be the pyramid. And that's what they say in remote viewing. Don't guess. And the left brain storyteller is the guess. If you guess, you go back to the left brain. You go back to the conscious brain and you try to figure it out. They say, do not. Just describe what you're feeling. Describe what you're seeing. Just describe your emotions, your smells. Stay in the here and now. Stay in the right brain. But the left brain will immediately, if there's any cue whatsoever, it will jump in and the remote viewing session is over. Psychic phenomena. Meditation is cutting the right brain down, just cutting the psychedelics was one of the most dramatic. It just absolutely kills the ego. And you're in the right brain, and so a lot of this religious experience. Savants, most savants have left brain damage. Most of these autistic savants. Again, here's this thing with the thing. This one I want to talk about because it is one of the most impressive things. I used it, it worked for me. I had a serious heart problem, worked for me, and this is one of the things. Everybody's into healing, into how healing works. The Bankston method is one of the most successful healing methods there is. When I found out about this, they kept talking about this rapid image cycling. And I go, what's the rapid image cycling? How do they do this? I'm trying to figure out how do they do this sort of thing. And they were talking about the success with 100% on mice and 5 labs and 10 experiments in 5 universities, stuff like this. What I found out was rapid image cycling. Here's how it works. You take 20 things that appeal to the ego, the left brain. And it may be I need a new car, and it's going to be blue, it's going to be a Ford, I need to have a motorhome, it has to be 25 feet. And you build these images of these things that you'd love to have, all these things that would appeal to the left brain ego. And then when the healing gets done, they were doing it with rats. And he said, well, the rat doesn't have to believe it's going to be cured. And the people that were doing the experiments were the most skeptical students he could find. If the student came to him and said, is this an experiment on gullibility? He'd say, you're the guy, you're going to do the healing. And that's who he used for the experiment. And he had this 100% success ratio. Just running this thing where we'd run these images through your head. And basically, when I saw it, I know what they're doing. I know exactly what they're doing. What they're doing is saying, left brain, here's something to entertain you. Go for coffee, away you go, and then the energy can heal. And he described it exactly that way. He said it's getting the healer out of the way. Because if your left brain, if you're analyzing, trying to say, well, I gotta believe, I gotta make this thing work or whatever, your left brain is doing all the talking and it blocks the healing. If you can get the left brain out of the way, go into the right brain, then this healing takes place. Now I want to get to the end here. These are savants. This is the guy who did the pie to 22,514 places. He says quite clearly he is not memorizing. He's just watching landscape. He's watching a right brain landscape of colors. He's just describing the colors, and this is in his mind. He watches the colors and he names off these colors. And it took him 5 hours, 22,000 places of pie. This is how he does numbers, to show you that a lot of what's being done by savants is not calculation. He sees one object, he sees a shape, he sees the other object, he waits, and the shape in between, he knows what the number is, fills in the spot, and he tells you what the answer is. He's not calculating at all. He sees it in color, of course. Here's what's in color. This is an idea that shows you that we now know how to do this. This is at the university, the Center for the Mind in Sydney, Australia, and what they do is they stimulate magnetically the left lobe. And people, they'll say, draw a cat. And the person will draw a cat, and it's a lousy looking cat, and they'll say, keep drawing, and then this thing's stimulating the lobe, and then suddenly the cat looks better and better, and they keep drawing, and suddenly they're drawing like somebody who's been drawing their whole life. And basically that shows that they can do this. Russell Targ, if you remember his ESP experiments where they were doing the silver market, they made all this money in the silver market. What they do is, and Russell Targ has said, you cannot, when you're remote viewing, you cannot see numbers, you cannot see words, because that's left brain. So what you do is you do associated remote viewing, so you use targets, like you use a pancake and a balloon and whatever, and you say, what object do you see? So you associate silver up, silver down, silver even with objects, and the person picks off the object, a right brain object rather than a left brain number. And they made piles of money in the silver market using this thing, and that's how remote viewing works, is going into the right brain and doing this. This guy had an injury, he's a savant, and suddenly he was able to see pi and all sorts of mathematical formulas, and he started to draw this. This one, if you believe, this is this whole thing about genetic information. This is one of the more important ones. And then I'll go to Diana Powell, because the savants are really interesting. When you see them, they've all got the left brain damage. These are Michael and John. They're two autistic savants from the 1960s, and people will, you've heard this thing with calendar counting. You'll see them ask them these calendar questions about times in the future, and they can calculate for leap years, for changing from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. They can absolutely tell you what day of the week it is. So you say, well, they're called calendar calculators. And you think, well, they're calculating. And this will show you, can tell me whether you think they're calculating. And what you see is the left brain does mathematics. It'll do adding, subtracting, all this sort of stuff. So you tell me when you see this, are they in the left brain or are they in the right brain? It's very dramatic. I'll leave this. This is the dropping the toothpicks. This is a true story. This is dropping the toothpicks where it can instantly count objects on the floor.
It's July 19th, in the year 92,000. July 19th, 92,000? 860. There it is. 92,860? Yes. That will be 92,860, July 19th? Right, July 19th. That will be on July 18th, 92,840. Yeah. That will be on a Monday. On Monday, all right. Now, July 19th in the year 132,470. Figure this one out. July 19th, that will be on a Saturday. Saturday. All right. Now, I want to ask some other questions. Yeah. How many days in a year? 365. 365. Is it more than 365 or exactly 365? And the leap year is 366. 366. Leap year. All right. How many days in a week? 307. How many months in a year? 12. How many hours in a day? 24. How many minutes in an hour? 10 minutes. 10 minutes. How many seconds in a minute? 10 seconds. 10 seconds. Sure it's not more than 10? I'm sure. Sure. All right. How much is 4 times 7? 4 times 7, I don't know. You don't know? No, but there was 4. Mom, McBride taught you for months. Remember? You remember when McBride taught you? Yeah. What day was that he taught you on? That's in 1964. 64. What month? In February. What ward? Ward 5. Right. Now, 4 times 7 is how much? Is it 21? 21. Mm-hmm. Couldn't be more? Couldn't be more.
So the left brain shut down. They can't do 4 times 7, but they can tell you what day is. This is a download type thing. Now, this is a guy, I'll do this one, then I'm going to go to Diane Powell, which is the most, I say, if it were a fair world, Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell would win a Nobel Prize. But because it's not a fair world, she's totally ignored. I'm going to show you this. This is a guy, Bob Millen. They did an experiment at Penn State University. This is a guy that can keep 4 symphonies in his head at the same time. So what he does is he hears the 4 symphonies. He goes into an MRI machine. He has a headset, and it has a screen where she's communicating with him. They play he has the 4 symphonies. They say, okay, start the first one, the Handel Symphony. Okay, 30 seconds later they say, okay, start the Bach Symphony. Okay, he starts the Bach Symphony. Then 30 seconds later, another one. Then another one. Then it plays for about 5 minutes. Then they come back and say, okay, stop. Now where are you in the Handel? And he goes, da, 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 and they go, everyone, absolutely, to the note he had them. He can carry 4 symphonies in his head. And there's another kid, this
Jay
Blue
says
Jay
that the
kid.
music just fills his head and he has to write it down.
This is a kid that can have numerous symphonies in his head at the same time. It's the same thing. He's 11 years old. He's written 4 symphonies, and he can write an entire symphony in a couple of hours. And this is his ability to get this kind of stuff. And you say they're not figuring this out. They're getting this stuff downloaded. Now here's Diana Powell, who I was fortunate enough to meet and then follow her work. Here's her. Well, let me explain this first. Has everybody seen this video? Anybody seen this? Okay. This is a video. She works with nonverbal autistic children. Now, nonverbal autistic is the worst. This is the language center is completely shut down. And what they found is when you look into ESP, these are the best ESP people there are. The left brain is completely shut down, and the more the damage, the better it is. This is one of the best. There are a number of these kids around the world. This is one, her name is Audrey. Audrey is going to, what they did was they gave her numbers, and at one point she got 162 numbers in a row right. Now you're talking ESP, 162 in a row. Here she's going to do 18, and what they did is she got bored. Autistic kids get very bored, very troublesome when they're bored, and so what they said is we'll play a little game, we'll do a mathematical. So she's picking off the question, the answer, she's picking off the whole thing, and they run this together. So you'll see, and on the left-hand side, people ask, on the left-hand side you'll see this little screen, and Audrey is pushing the screen. It's a talker. It's got nothing to do with the experiment, and you'll see her poking this board. And what they did is they set up a divider, and she is telepathic with her, one of her handlers, one of the people that deals with her during the day, a therapist. And the therapist found out by one day believing that Audrey was reading her mind, and so she said to her, "How do you say I love you in German?" And the girl told her, punched it into her thing and told her. And so she contacted Diana Powell. And Diana Powell went, and she started working with this girl and has presented this evidence with this dramatic situation where this girl is basically like alien telepathy. It's like basically pure telepathy. So here's the experiment. There's a dividing wall. You'll see the girl putting the board over. She keeps putting this board, and she'll touch the board. It goes back and forth, and Diane explains what's going on.
The video you're looking at shows the experimental setup we had last spring. Haley, a 10-year-old severely autistic child, and her therapist are seated alone in the room, together at a table and separated by a tall partition that prevents eye-to-eye or physical contact. Cards with randomized numbers, words, sentences, pictures, and equations were hidden until the experiment. The therapist viewed them one by one on her side of the visual barrier and then asked Haley what she was thinking or looking at. Haley pointed with her wooden pencil inside characters on stencils with her right hand to select them, and then entered them with her left into a device that converts text to speech. You'll notice that there are no characters for division signs, equal signs, or decimal points, so the therapist had to tell Haley when these occurred. You'll also notice that her answer is 100% accurate on 18 out of 18 digits. This is just one of 10 equations that she did in a 10-minute period.
This is another girl in the United Arab Emirates. I'm just going to go to the last slide here. This is an interesting one. Ego, oneness, separate, connected. Selfish is left brain. Altruistic, there's actually experiments when they did the split brain persons where the right brain was trying to help the left brain. Every time the left brain got something wrong, they would cough or shake his head. And at one point, they actually caught the left hand writing the answer on the right hand. So the right brain is altruistic. It's trying to help. And that's and then you get the thing why one of the reasons why it's not going to go over very well, because left brain, this individual is Republican. It's the ego. It's the protection of the individual. And so you're going to have this thing where capitalism sort of comes under attack. And I wrote a book here, and I wrote an article about are aliens communists? And it's this whole idea that a lot of the early experiencers were being followed around because they believed that the aliens were communists, that they had this idea that we should try to help everybody, that we should, not try to, ravage the world and stuff like this. And the FBI didn't like those kind of ideas. So here's how I think it works. It's basically the right brain, left brain thing, that if you can shut off the left brain, and we know how to do it. We know a number of ways to do it. We can shut the left brain off, gets you into the right brain, and I call it a password. It just gives you a password. It's small mind, big mind. You get the password, you get into the big mind, you got all the answers, you got whatever you want. Sometimes you get 5 minutes there. If you're a savant, you're there for the rest of your life. And basically, once you get it, it's like a browser, you get over there, and then it depends on which signal you are. Which method you're using, how good the method you're using will determine what your signal is and how good the signal you can get from the unconscious universe, or holographic field, or whatever you want to call it. I'm really not saying where it's coming from. All I know is that when you shut the left brain down, go to the right brain will link in, and anything you want is there. That's it. Thanks. Wow. Lorien!
Can I be the first question?
Sure.
Do you have any plans in the future on how to connect your research with maybe Dr. Diane Powell's research on how, with maybe having her work with ET contactees?
She knows about it. She used to work for John Mack.
I know that, but are you two?
I'm corresponding with her, but she's got her hands full trying to get her thing. When she tried to raise money, this is one of the problems. She tried to raise money, and she raised like $6,000 or something. It was embarrassing. Yeah. And this was, I said, I mean, if this was a fair world, that's Nobel Prize. I mean, that is the most important discovery in the world, where you can actually show something that shows how consciousness actually works. Pure consciousness is pure.
Well, I'm thinking maybe you can convince Diane, because I know Diane too, and I'll make a call.
Yeah.
I'll call her and say, look, why don't you work with Grant, work with the free people?
See,
and
she's
somehow...
working with some big heavy. She's now been picked up by what's his name, the big consciousness guy.
Which one?
Deepak Chopra.
Oh, wonderful.
So she's been picked up by a number of people now, and IONS is watching her work. There's a number of people watching her work, and she's just trying to get this thing. And it's amazing. You've got an experiment like that, which when she showed it in California in August, and I told you when this was coming up, she showed it. There was one newspaper that covered it. That was some British blog on a thing. Nobody picked up the story. Nobody covered it. It was almost like ufology. It's embarrassing that happened.
Yeah, it is. It's a travesty.
Because she also has now the kid. She has a kid. If you go on her site, it's called Telepathy Project. You go to her site. She has an update letter. When you follow her update letter, she now has a kid, this 5-year-old kid, who speaks 7 languages. And his parents only speak 4. This kid somehow has learned Hebrew on his own. He's learned all these languages. He's 5 years old. And that's one of the kids she's working with. So she's in what I would say is the real forefront of consciousness research, where she's dealing, and that's what I think what you do with consciousness research, is to find somebody who's got a clear signal, that's getting a clear signal, something very dramatic, and then find out what's actually going on there. And what I think is happening there with these, like with Audrey, with this little girl she's working with, is that the left brain damage is so bad that the filter's completely cut off. And Diane even stated that when you start to teach the kid to talk, that the telepathy starts to go away. That you start bringing the left brain back online, and it goes away. It's very important research. I would recommend everybody to go to Telepathy Project, Diana Powell, and just get on her update letter, because the stuff that she's coming up with is just unbelievable. Yeah?
What folks do you know who are working together collectively?
In terms of, I don't understand what you're saying, like IONS is doing probably the most of any organization, where they're open to it all, they're doing all the experiments and stuff. The problem with the world, we were asked this question at Lorien's conference last weekend. A scientist stood up and said, well, why don't you guys cooperate? And I said, well, because there's no money. I mean, if we're all making $50,000 or $60,000 a year, then we'd all, stop fighting, and we'd all just sort of work together, and some dean would tell us what to do. But because everybody's not getting paid and everybody's got their idea and that's all they own, you have this sort of thing where nobody's really working together with each other. Like the abduction, I say the most important people in ufology are the people who are experiencers, because they're getting these downloads and they're being given stuff. They've got these missions, and if you can get them all together, but the problem is that the people who are doing the regressions all have their own material, and they don't spread the material. It's my file, it's confidential, I can't tell you what she said during the regression or whatever. So we have these sort of disconnects where...
It's also a thing of initiative. A lot of the people that are doing this are very sort of creative. They're glad to finally have a niche that they've chiseled out. And it's very difficult for them to suddenly collude with other people and say, I mean, unless they come from an environment where previously they were part of a team. Maybe then, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's just at its infancy. There's like this kind of thing, as I said, when you get to the storyteller, I mean, it's not discussed, it's known, but when you take a look at scientific investigation, for example, if you're doing an experiment, I say you've got to consider the storyteller. So you say, I did this experiment, I found out this, this, and this, but what you don't realize is you found out this, this, and this, and your left brain storyteller still took a bunch of stories and put them in between. So you publish the whole thing, and the whole thing gets out, and half of it's total garbage because it's made up with the left brain storyteller. but we don't even consider it when we do scientific research. We think that we're doing pure research and we're picking the stuff and we're analytically analyzing the stuff, and we're not. We just got a few facts, and the rest is all just BS. It's been made up. So there's so many problems. It's just starting, and I put this stuff all together. I was shocked. I mean, most of the stuff I'd never seen. It's not being discussed. So we're sort of in a stage of infancy where it's starting to move together. But I think the main problem is you don't have any. No universities will take it. You know, the odd one will have a course, but nobody will accept it. There's only 4% of people in the National Academy of Sciences who believe in any sort of paranormal phenomena, and that's because it's like the Vatican. It's a place where you get the National Academy of Sciences. If you believe in UFOs, you're gone if you open your mouth. So everybody, only 7% believe in God in the National. That's the top 2,000 scientists in the United States. So you have this paradigm of absolute rigid physical universe. You believe it's physical universe. You believe it's random. You believe it's evolution. There is no physical. There is no non-local. There is none of this stuff. It's all crap. These people are all pseudoscience. They're crazy, and that's the predominant model that's being taught in schools, and that's what we're up against. And we don't have the money. They've got the money. They've got the grants. You propose something that's kind of Looney Tune, you will not get funded. You will not get tenure. Your career is over. And that's the sort of things we're up against. But that's why I say the aliens are coming in through the back door. That it doesn't really matter what the government does anymore. Because if you've got 43% of 6.5 million people who are getting downloads and getting stuff coming up through the bottom, it's coming out whether the government likes it or not. Yeah.
What it actually meant was the power of synergy, so that if one person is tuning in, then 3 or 30 people will create a field that will receive it more readily, and then, as Steiner said, you get 12 different people to give each a different aspect of something, and you begin to get a whole view of something. So in that sense, people, outside of all the considerations that we know about living, funding, you know, all of money, all of that, just in order to get the material to most readily come through. I wondered if there were people.
Doing a really good job of that.
Huh?
I think Free's doing a really good job of that. Grant is part of the whole advisory.
And there is a synergy. There is, Lorien and I have discussed this. 2012, when I had the download, before 2012, there was nobody in the UFO community, guarantee you, except for Colin Andrews, talking about consciousness. It just was a non-issue. You were a wacko. I mean, even I consider them wackos. I mean, there's these women selling crystals, and it's like, get out of here. It's like, that's the way it's considered. Since 2012, Lorien can confirm, this is the hot topic in ufology. I mean, it's like everybody's sort of realizing this. Everybody realizes this is a key topic. People want to discuss it. When I come, people want me to talk consciousness. They don't want me to talk anything else. And so you can see I would describe it, I say we're no different, whether it's consciousness, whether it's parapsychology, whether it's UFOs. We are no different than any other social and political movement. Every movement starts from the bottom, and it works its way up, whether it's African American rights, and it doesn't matter how many bad movies they made about African American rights or gays or whatever. Eventually the consciousness just goes up, people keep talking. That's why I say you keep talking about it, and you start getting this movement, and in the end you're going to get a situation that happened with Rush Limbaugh. I mean, in the United States, I'm traveling across the United States, and Rush Limbaugh says, I heard him say it, that's it, they've got it, give it to him. Gay marriage, they've got it, give it to him. And I went, wow. We're over the hill and down we go. And that's the way I think it works. I don't think it's like a magic thing where it just suddenly happens. I think it's a thing that comes from the bottom, and they are working definitely. You see all these synchronicities of things happening inside the field where things link together. That's why I couldn't do the book. I mean, stuff was coming so fast. It was like unbelievable. And then I find out that other people, Lorien's had all sorts of downloads as well, that I start walking around and everybody's getting these downloads. And that didn't happen in '75. It was a completely different world. So you can see this thing, but it's happening indirect, and you can't really tell what's going on. But it is this sort of synergy where things are, there's something behind the scenes is pulling this all together.
It'd be nice if the egg could crack in academia somewhere. And I think maybe cognitive psychology might be an option. I know Arizona, and it's got a lot of people there dealing with the quantum function of consciousness and trying to find an inroad there with, in a philosophical kind of way, you know?
Yeah. But you still have the problem that with the left brain storyteller, that it is so rigid. I mean, that's like Bankston. Bankston should have won a Nobel Prize too. 100% cure rate on mice, and he said there was a PhD came to him And a PhD from Australia saw him give the lecture, and he said, "This is incredible. I want to do this right now." And he said, "Get away from me." And the guy said, "No, this is the most important thing I've ever seen in my life." He said, "Get away from me." And the guy said, "No, I want to do it." He said, "Go away, come back in 7 years." He said, "I'm not going to destroy your career." And it's like Bankston, nobody will touch the guy. Nobody will touch that idea. And you look at it and you go, and there's no doubt. I mean, it worked for me. I was shocked. And so
What worked for you?
this Bankston thing, I had heard there's a show called Skeptical, which I highly recommend. It's spelled with K-O, Alex Takaris, and he had this very serious heart condition. He puts on one of the healers. He tells her, "I'm going to interview you. I'm going to tell you when it's all over. If it works, I'll tell everybody. If it doesn't work, everybody's going to know about it." And he gone. And so
What worked?
this remote healing thing, this Bankston method using the rapid image cycling. So I phoned him up. I know him. I was on his show. I said, "Hey, Alex," I said, "you do that rapid image cycling?" And he said, "No, I was just the rat in the cage." And I said, "I think I'm going to try this." I had a heart murmur. I was diagnosed by my doctor, suddenly I had a heart murmur. And it wasn't, and I sent me to the specialist, and I got to the front of the line, went to the specialist. The intern looked at it, did all these tests. Then the specialist was brought in. He asked him all these questions. What heart valve is it? They were talking which heart valve. Why do you know it was this heart valve? And then I started the rapid image cycling. I had Thursday morning I went for my echo. Thursday night was my first treatment, but I was already imaging. Went for echo, and they said, "Clean, nothing wrong." And so I don't really know, but that was enough for me to say, and now they're talking about Alzheimer's. This works on Alzheimer's. They can reverse Alzheimer's. So you look at that and you say, well, isn't that at least worth looking at? I mean, track it down. Is anybody looking at it? And Bankston will tell you the same as ufology, like, he's like, totally ignored. I mean, it's like, or he does the thing where he does the thing with need. He's in an MRI, he puts his hand out, he's lying in the MRI, and just his hand is up, and they're putting envelopes in his hand, they take them out, put an envelope in his hand, take it out, envelope in his hand, and some of the envelopes don't have anything in them, and some have hair from a mouse that's got cancer. And they're watching his brain, and every time the mouse with cancer, his brain will trigger, every single time, 100%, he's in the MRI. So that kind of stuff, and you go like, wow, why are we looking at this stuff? It's just that we're so far removed from mainstream science where you don't dare stand up and say anything, because you're finished. I mean, in the UFO community, John Mack, who was the first guy to do the abduction thing, Harvard University was the first person in the history of Harvard University, they were going to pull his tenure. He went for 16 months and managed to fight his, Danny Sheehan got him off the hook. But here was a guy, and David Jacobs from Temple University, doing alien abduction research, was an associate professor his entire career. He said, this is absolutely toxic. He said, graduate students come out like to do that. He said, do not. Your career's over. Do not do this. You will never be promoted. You will never go anywhere. And he never got promoted in 30 years because he was doing this kind of stuff. So it's just so hostile, the scientific community, to this kind of stuff. And it'll come back from the bottom. But there is, in the last 2 years, a big move.
I want to make one comment to what Grant was just saying.
Yeah.
Bergstrom is speaking in Mill Valley Friday and teaching.
Yeah. If you look up William Bankston, he's actually speaking in Mill Valley on Friday. I'm lecturing, so I can't go to it. And they're doing the training. I'm going to go to the training, but if you go to his lecture, or if you go to skeptico.com and you put in the search engine in skeptico.com, it's spelled with a K-O, not a C-O, you will see Bankston, and then Bernadette Doran was the healer, where he actually challenged her. He said, okay, we're going to do this, how does it work? But Bankston actually talks about all the experiments. And he talks about, it's so effective that when they had the healers, these skeptical students, if the students got into the room where the control rats were all healed as well. And he talks about this, and there's no doubt his material's there, but it's the same thing in whether it's parapsychology, whether it's ufology, whether it's healing or something. The atmosphere is just so toxic from the scientific community. But I say it's moving. It's coming from the bottom up, though.
I got a comment about this. I think it's going to come through the UFO community because we're already at the bottom of the rung and nobody cares about us anyway. You know, seriously.
Yeah, but the UFOs has gone to the consciousness big time. I mean,
exactly.
it's moved over.
And that's why it's in our field and not in a scientific setting and what have you.
Okay, another question? Yes, sir.
Good question. So when you talked about the right and left brain, I had experiences where people would have a right brain experience with them, and the left brain afterwards cannot digest it, and negated it. It was like two different people.
It was. They actually talked about the fact that the left brain, right brain actually fight with each other. When you cut the corpus callosum and the brains can't communicate, they would talk about experiment things where the hands were both trying to open the car door and they're fighting with each other trying to open the car door, or the one would want to smoke and the other one take the cigarette out and throw it.
It was pretty fascinating though to see it happen, not realizing what it was until you explained it. Then it made all the sense in the world. It actually negated the experience it could not comprehend.
Yeah.
And the other part is when I do sound healing as well with Tibetan bowls, which have their own vibration.
Mhm.
And like probably 99% of the time when people go deep into their meditative space with the sound, the mind can't grab it because there's no pattern to it. So the right mind goes extremely deep into itself, and the left one wakes up and said, "Where was I?"
Yeah, yeah. That's what you're doing. Is you're sending the left brain for coffee or
Yeah.
go play or whatever.
You can't grab it, and it's like
yeah.
it's amazing to see. And I didn't realize why I knew it happened, but I didn't realize why.
Yeah.
And it literally says, "Where did I just go?"
Yeah, yeah. It's like a remote viewing they call to kill the ego. You have to kill the ego before you go.
Thank you for that.
Question over here?
He's been trying to get your attention.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. So what you said about the fighting of the left and the right brain, it made me immediately think of the movie All of Me with Steve Martin and Lily Tomlin. The courtroom scene is absolutely classic and hysterical anyway, so that's just an aside. But what I was, when you were talking about career killers for academia in ufology and everything, I thought of neurofeedback as a bridge that can objectify, it's the nexus between science, hardcore science, and consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's definitely a future there using neurofeedback, because what it can do is you can train the brain to normalize brainwave activity and balance everything. So if you can lower the beta, which is the excitatory, and the active, and if you can enhance the delta and theta waves, then you can actually help to bring people into these states that you're talking about, where they're more receptive to downloads.
Yeah, that's why I say I think we've learned the processes. We know sort of how it works now, and there's a number of different ways. And there are I'm not saying that it's totally bad, because there are breakthroughs. IONS is doing breakthroughs. A lot of that is being sort of generally accepted by the community, although scientists won't acknowledge it. But if you take a look at psychedelics, it's now being redone. They're working at Johns Hopkins, NYU, UCLA, and they're using psychedelics. It's always been known that you can cure 59% of all alcoholics with one hit of LSD, and that these people have this experience and they quit drinking. So they're using it. They're using psilocybin at Johns Hopkins, and they're using it for people who are dying patients to come to grips with it, and they have this experience and they're ready to die. And so all this kind of stuff, or the enhancement of creativity, where they're using it for creativity. So this kind of stuff, you're seeing these kind of breakthroughs in various areas. It's just we got so far to go, and we got this big mountain to sort of move of these people who are professors making $135,000 a year. For him to step out and say, no, I'm going to shut her down, I was all wrong, it's such a big mountain to move that you've got to make headrows. But we are. In fact, what I say is, definitely we know how to do this. We know how it works. I know how it works. In fact, I even keep a pad of paper with me all the time, and that's the problem I had with the book, was once I learned how to do it, I use a different method. What I do is I just basically don't do any left brain things. I don't watch TV. I don't read newspaper. I don't talk gossip with people. I don't do any left brain things that drag you back into the left brain world. And I've gotten a situation where I had a download on the first one, then I had one January the 6th, January 26th, February the 6th, and it was sort of like, the stuff is coming and I got to keep writing stuff down, get up in the middle of the night and writing stuff down. And even myself, I started to learn how to do it, and I couldn't shut it off. I mean, it was like coming so great. So we know how to do it. It's ego. We're all separate. We're just random particles. We're biological robots. Nothing is connected. So it's me versus you. And I'm always the good guy. I can be Al-Qaeda. I can be ISIS. I can be an American, Canadian. Everybody's the good guy. Therefore, you're the bad guy. And you're the guy that's causing me trouble in my world. You're the guy that's taking my money. You're taking my jobs, whatever. And I can drop a bomb on you. You don't have to worry about it. But if you get into the right brain world, then there is no me versus you. Everybody's connected. Everybody's leaves on the tree. The tree needs you. You need the tree. And you can't just say, Al-Qaeda's bad, we're going to cut that branch off, because then Al-Qaeda says, well, you're bad, and they cut our branch off, and then we cut their branch off, and they cut our branch off, and next thing the tree's got no branches, and the tree dies. And that's what we're doing. But when you believe that in the right brain world, that everything is one, if the aliens are left-brained, and I believe they are because they're totally telepathic, they are in that world, which is altruistic, which is trying to write the answer on the hand. That's why they're helping us. People say, why would the aliens help us? Because they're right brain. They're altruistic. That's the whole thing. They don't work like us, like go and, invade a country and bring them, freedom, democracy, Jesus, and McDonald's. They don't do it that way. They're right brain. We're left brain. We believe we're separate and that we have to, grab this land or with this oil, or it's this very sort of selfish world where we believe everybody's in competition with each other. We have to fight. If you don't fight to take what you can, you're gone. The right brain doesn't work.
The left brain was very valuable for survival of the fittest kind of a thing.
You need it. You couldn't survive without the left brain. The left brain tells you, don't step on the ice, buy bananas, you got to brush your teeth. It was needed. So God, nature, whatever, put it in there. You need the left brain. You need that conscious thing. But all you have to remember is that it blocks the rest of consciousness.
Maybe that's to protect the body.
Yeah, it's to allow you to survive in the physical world. Because if you didn't have the left brain, you'd be like Audrey, or this little girl, or like a Savant, where you're just sort of drooling and you're in nirvana and it's like everything's great here, but you can't feed yourself. You can't, like the Rain Man couldn't button his shirt and stuff like that. You need the analytical stuff. It's just the remembrance that it's a physical world, but it's not just a physical world. And if you cut that out, you realize it's not just a physical world.
You develop a switch to shut off that left side.
Yeah, and we've learned to do that. I believe we've learned to do that. Yes?
Two comments. One's a comment and one is a question.
Okay.
So the first thing is, I was here about 2 weeks ago in a lecture about entanglement.
Yeah.
And so I think one thing that the UFO community needs to do is, build credibility through facts. And actually Einstein was totally against entanglement.
Well, that he proposed the experiment.
No, he called that spooky action at a
Yeah,
distance.
but he proposed the experiment. He was the one that proposed that we test this because he said, I don't believe this. So he proposed the experiment that was eventually run in 1980. And when they did the experiment, they confirmed the spooky action and distance. I agree with you. He didn't like it.
Yeah.
He didn't like any of it.
I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same
Yeah,
page.
yeah.
It was Schrodinger.
Yeah, he didn't like a lot of the stuff that was going on.
Yeah, that
there.
was like his big mistake.
I mean,
So we just need to make sure that when we're describing entanglement, that Einstein, that was like his biggest mistake ever, that he didn't believe in it.
Well, I don't know, mistake. He just didn't believe it. I mean, people have beliefs. He just didn't believe it. But there was this Rosenberg and Einstein, these three guys, and they proposed the experiment. He said, if this is right, and then Bell in the 1960s did the calculation, which seemed to confirm that it was right, and then in 1980, these people in France ran the experiment that actually confirmed that this entanglement thing did exist. But it was Einstein that challenged it and said, we've got to do an experiment, I don't believe this crap, and stuff like that. So it was...
So I just,
Yeah, you're right.
I didn't want to go into huge, it was just that kind of caught me off guard when you were talking about Einstein, because that's not...
Please, tell us about your books. Tell us about your books.
Oh, okay. Okay, go ahead.
So one of the questions that I have is, so all of this, the right brain and consciousness, how is it that, what's the tie-in to ETs? How do we know it's not just some form of human potential that we just don't know about yet? Like, how do we know, what's the tie, I'm trying to get what the tie-in is. How do we know that it's
it doesn't matter. If
ETs
it's human
for
potential,
downloads?
if somebody's coming up with these massive mathematical formulas, they're getting it from somewhere. And I say it doesn't really matter because a lot of people, for example, the AA thing said he was getting it from a 15th century monk. Carlos Santana was getting all this music. He said he was getting it from the Archangel Metatron. I mean, I'm saying I don't really care where it's coming from. I'm saying the right brain links it in. All I'm saying is that there are people who are getting downloads of material that there's no way they learned it from somewhere. It is coming through there, and what I'm saying, the mechanism that I say is clear is that it's coming from the right brain, is linking into something. And where it's coming from, I don't really answer that question. I just say, and if it's human potential, then we should learn to do what this human potential is that's able to, do all these things. When you look at my book that's coming out, it's like hundreds and hundreds of examples, 8 Nobel Prizes. The idea of the atom, the present idea of the atom came in a dream. It was, the guy was showing a racetrack, and the horse is going around, and a voice going in his head, and this is how it works, and you got to move back if you want to change lanes and stuff, and that's for the won the Nobel Prize. So if it's human potential, it doesn't really matter to me what it is. There's downloads, and it's very important stuff that I think we should look at.
Thank you.
You finished?
Yeah.
Yeah, shifting a little bit from brains now, would you comment on the current effort in Washington to declassify the UFO documents and what impact that might have if they're successful?
I'll give you my opinion. I don't think they're trying to declassify anything, although I think something's happening. I think Obama has come out and made this this appearance on this talk show. Well, one of the books that I wrote is this one here. And what I say in the book is I believe that the government has been leaking stuff for years. And the problem that I see is that they see everything as classified. If you are a military guy in the U.S. military, you're left-brained. It's the Americans are the good guys, China's bad, Mexicans are bad and they're lazy, Canadians let the terrorists in, and it's like everybody's an enemy except for us. We're the good guys, we're the light on the hill. So if you're the U.S. military and you're looking at the UFO problem, you're saying, I'm not going to give this technology to Al-Qaeda. I'm not going to give it to ISIS because they're just going to kill Americans with it. So it's this left-brain mentality that says everybody's an enemy and we have to protect this. We're the good guys, and so they keep it classified. And that's the main reason why they're keeping it classified. Although there is a movement, and I said, Obama has come out and made a number of statements which are like on the edge. I mean, he's right on the edge of joking about it, talking about it. And if you take a look at the Bush administration, neither of them ever used the word UFO ever in all their administrations. Obama's talking about it all the time. And it's almost like he's on the edge. He's bugging the guys who control the secrecy. And then you have John Podesta, who was one of the chief advisors to President Obama, who is going to be the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton. And he came out and said, he tweets this, and nobody's forcing him to do this. He tweets this, and he said he went into the Obama administration in December of 2012. He leaves in, 2013. He leaves in January of 2015, and he says, he's tweeting, and he says, the biggest disappointment I had in 2014 is I still wasn't able to get the UFO information out. Now, this is a very high-level guy. Now, he's doing this for a reason. Things in Washington don't happen by accident. So I think they're making these sort of indirect type disclosure events happening that is different than it was before. Now, how it happens, I don't know. Joe would probably be the best at this. I mean, we've discussed this numerous times, how this happens. People are forcing them, and I think the pressure is forcing action. I think there's enough pressure by people, by groups like, the Disclosure Project and stuff like this, and Steve Bassett, where they're putting pressure on the government. But the government is always, it's always this left brain thing, that the government is always going to fall back on the military saying, hang on, Mr. President, the aliens may be evil, we need to protect ourselves, and if the president's in the left brain mode too, then they're going to look at it as us versus them, and that's the way to look at it. The aliens are bad guys, they're invading our airspace, and this kind of stuff, and we have to treat them like enemies. So that's the main problem. I don't think there's really any disclosure. Maybe you got a comment, Joe.
I talked to Steve frequently, and we had a long conversation today, and the Podesta tweet was very helpful in getting in to see congressional staff senators.
Oh, he's used that.
Having meetings on the Hill.
Oh, excellent.
And, he did get funding to duplicate 10 disc sets of the entire citizens hearing. Then shipped them off to the 535 offices of the United States Congress. Probably most of them went directly in the trash, but a few of them may have hit. So, it's going to take someone on some committee to take the lead like Stephen Schiff again.
Yeah.
Steve's fertilizing those grounds. He'll be here on April 23rd, Thursday.
Yeah. He'll explain it pretty well.
Tour. So that's a big deal. But are you aware that Ray Bradbury wrote a book called Zen and the Art of Writing?
I've heard.
Basically says the same sort of thing. He felt like he was more of a scribe taking dictation from the author of anything he wrote.
Yeah.
And that's a common story I've heard from other authors. Richard Bach said he heard the words Jonathan and the Seagull out of his left ear as he was walking down a dock in Long Beach.
Yeah.
And then raced home where the wall melted, and he just tried to type what he saw on the screen in front of him as fast as possible, and then it stopped halfway through, and it was like 10 years later before he finished finish the story.
Yeah.
Richard Paul Evans wrote the best-selling ever self-published book, a Christmas box story, and said he thought it was his older sister who was a stillborn child and dedicated the book to her, who wrote for Sue. He thought she was dictating, and he wrote it out of sequence on the back of envelopes where you have to pull off the interstate highway and ride in the shoulder of the road as fast as he could, and it was out of order. It made no sense. He thought he was going insane.
Wow.
But anyway, all those are just extra stuff to throw in your book. If you want, I'll email you all the
I would
information for
appreciate
it.
it. Yeah.
But Eric Walker, didn't he also say that you had to be really good at both ESP and math?
And math,
to be
yeah.
read into the group?
He was one of a number of people who talked about math. He said, unless you have the mind of Einstein, you're never, how good is your math, he asked at one point. And then he said, unless you have the mind of Einstein, you're never going to solve this problem.
And didn't he also say, if you had those abilities in ESP and math, I would already know who you are?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And who was it who chased him down? Was it you that had those phone conversations with him? Or
No, there was a bunch of researchers. The main guy was out of Great Britain, Henry Azzadadel. There was a guy at Penn State who was phoning him. There was a guy in Toronto who was phoning him. There's about 8 researchers, and they all basically said, I can get him to talk. I never did any of the interviews. I just sort of coordinated all these people, gave them the phone numbers, and they were all trying to get him to talk.
But they didn't get that on tape. This is what people say that he said.
Azzadadels were on tape, yeah. Azzadadels, one conversation was on tape, it was scrambled. When it came on, he talked to Walker's wife. As soon as Walker came on the phone, it was scrambled. He played me that.
And the Walker's files were mysteriously disappeared.
Yeah, he had a file. We knew he had a file because he kept mailing stuff to us. He did this weird thing where he'd go to the Institute for Defense Analysis, and then he would mail us one of our letters to somebody else. So we knew he had this in a file. We were trying to find his file. And his son was a medical doctor. We contacted his son after Walker died, and he said when he sent the files to Penn State, there was nothing there. But he remembered the file. He had seen the file, and it talked about 2 crashes. One was in the West, one was in Pennsylvania, and he had seen the file. He didn't really read it, but he said that file was not there when his father's files went to Penn State. And that comes to the same issue you talked about, is that Walker was a patriotic guy. And it's like, I'm going to play the game. It's classified, I can't talk about it. And so he was the loyal guy to the thing and destroyed his file before he died, because that was the right thing to do. And that's what I think happens. And what I think happens in the government is, as deluded as they may be, they all think they're doing the right thing, because this cover-up has gone on for 70 years now, and everybody's played the game. Nobody's defected, which tends to indicate to me there's something behind the scenes that they're being told that makes them, and I think it's the classification thing. It's just, this is classified, you can't talk about it, or you don't know about it. There's only maybe a couple people who know about it. And so everybody plays the game, and the cover-up continues on. And
I was on a panel with James Fox at the Sonoma Festival. So James said, Steve Bassett's efforts, all this is just a waste of time because the president doesn't know, Congress doesn't know, it's gone transnational, it's in this, breakaway civilization that Richard Dolan writes about. I think there's some credibility to that. But what I said in response to that was, Congress may not know, but I believe, maybe just a shred of hope here, that the United States Congress still has the power to indemnify witnesses, to relieve them of any secrecy oaths, and then to hold open hearings, to protect whistleblowers and hold open hearings. And this administration, the Obama administration, has been the worst at persecuting, not prosecuting, truly persecuting any whistleblower to waste, fraud, criminal activity, or this UFO issue inside of the government. So I think Steve's efforts are quite worthwhile.
Oh yeah, I agree.
The United States Congress could reclaim its authority by taking that action of protecting whistleblowers on all 4 of those issues I just mentioned, and then having hearings.
Sure. It has to come from pressure, from the bottom. It's like Hillary Clinton talked about, the women's right to vote started in 1848. They didn't get the right to vote till 1920. Now, good idea now, but it wasn't then. And they had to fight for it, the same as the African Americans had to fight to get their thing. And it's not something that anybody's going to hand you. It comes from people doing their civic duty and forcing the issues if they've got the right thing. That's why I'm saying we're no different than any other social and political movement. But you're mentioning the Congress, and you remember at the citizens' hearing, Jesse Marcel, I wanted to tell his story. He went and told the story about he gets contacted by Dick D'Amato, who's working for the Senate Appropriations Committee, by Byrd, and Byrd is saying, we're handing out the money here in the government. Are they doing flying saucers? And he sends Dick D'Amato to Area 51, and he talks to this high-level guy at Area 51, and the guy says, I'm not going to talk. And he comes back to Jesse Marcel in a secure room in two levels below the Capitol, and he says, I just wanted to let you know this thing's for real. And Jesse said, when are you going to disclose? And Dick D'Amato said, if I was running the thing, I would disclose. I'm just here to tell the government, to tell the Senate Appropriations Committee how much money this is costing us.
In that secret room, he was pointing to one of
Strieber's book, which was about MJ-12 and about the Roswell crime.
Yeah, what's it called? It's not
Majestic.
Majestic.
Majestic. And he pointed at the book and he said, I just want to let you know this is for real. And Jesse said, well, what are you going to disclose? Well, I don't have any control. It was the same thing. So you have a guy, a legal advisor to the Senate Appropriations Committee knows what's going on. So I said that lots of people know what's going on. It's just, like Dick D'Amato says, I'm not running the show. I can't do anything. It's classified. I can't say anything. I just secretly want to let you know that this is for real. And you see that stuff over and over again, that the government is leaking little bits of the story. So they'll leak the fact that Area 51 is there, but they keep it classified. It sort of falls apart. The stories always fall apart. But you are right. Steve is doing what you have to do. You've got to keep the pressure on, because any social and political movement will not move unless somebody does something.
And that may be what they're waiting for.
Yeah, because the government is never going to wave the white flag. It's under pressure, whether it's the end of the war at Vietnam. And as I say, if you can suddenly put 250,000 people on the White House Mall, suddenly everybody's going to be just great. Or even Stephen Greer was told when he went on the Hill and he talked to these top senator guys, the guy said, I just want to let you know we support you. We'll lead the parade, you get the parade. As soon as you got the parade, we'll lead the parade. And that's what it's about. It's about getting votes. It's not about anything else. As soon as there's votes there.
That's the essence of democracy.
Exactly.
If the people demanded it, they would respond. They're not going to, anyway.
Yeah.
We could go on all night, but I'll
Okay.
be quiet now.
You haven't had a question. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I'm suddenly remembering about, oh gosh, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, even in this room, we were having a lecture that Sergio put together, and we saw a lot of orbs. We had
Wow.
flash, and I mean, we have pictures of them. Just
Yeah.
orbs that were flying around during our talk.
Wow. And orbs that's a very recent thing. That's where I think that it's happening in patterns. Orbs never happened before. This is a very recent phenomenon. It's almost like we're watching somebody turn the pages of a book, and things are happening. This happens, this happens. And there's things that have happened in ufology that don't happen anymore. People seeing aliens looking out of windows of craft doesn't happen anymore. Landing traces where it'll land and burn the grass and leave the little prints doesn't happen anymore. Little aliens getting out and running around outside the craft with a little rod doesn't happen anymore. It's almost like we're watching them turn the pages of a book, and they're starting to download these people. And you cannot believe how many people are getting these downloads. I can walk into any UFO meeting, talk to 5 people, and one of them will tell me an amazing story about being in class and told this thing and given this mission and it has mathematical formulas. It is really, really common. And so something definitely, we're being forced from the bottom up to expose this. And that's why you see a lot of the experiences, we'll talk about this MILAB thing, you'll hear about the military abductions, where they get re-abducted and then they're drugged and somebody's yelling at them, what were you told, what were you told? And the government's trying to figure out, same thing I know, that these are important people, they've got all this stuff in their head, and they're basically trying to find out what they know. They can't say, I'm from the NSA, I'd like to interview you about UFOs, but we're not into UFOs, I'd just like to interview you about what happened. You can't do that, so you've got to grab these people. And I know 4 major businessmen in Canada and the United States who deal with contactees. They try to deal with contactees because they've got inventions in their head. They've got all this kind of stuff, and to them it's just straight business. So this is a big thing. This download thing is big. It's happening all over the place, and it just started. Yes.
Yeah. There's an element that I keep wanting to hear be involved in this, and I haven't heard it brought up yet. And a lot of downloads, very similar, comes through the NDE experience.
Yep.
And the element is called love. I mean, I don't hear anything about.
It's in my book.
Kind of relationship. It is.
It's in my book. I have a chapter on what is the message. The number 1 message is love. Everything in the universe. The message to all these experiences, all these right-brain experiences. Love is the absolute core of the universe. The other message that comes across is you have to move. One of the people that had the best one was a band called Yes. Sold 55 million albums in the United States. The head guy his name was John Anderson. He tells the story quite clearly. He was in Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada, doing a show, and an alien came through the wall and gave him a bunch of information. In his main UFO song called Magical, it says the key word that you see over and over again through all these right brain experiences is you have to, and I sign all my books this way, you have to move from fear to love. You have to move from the left brain fear to the right brain love. Love is absolutely, as you point out, it is by far and away the biggest message of all these experiences. And it's pure love. Everything works by love. And when you don't have love, when love is missing, it's fear. There is only love in the universe. Everything is love. You're right, absolutely. And in fact, I had a slide, but I never got to the slide. I can talk about that.
Sergio was wanting me to ask you to describe your books and tell the audience their price.
Okay, my books are 15. I have the one which was my pre-consciousness thing where I talk about Area 51, and it was the guy who broke the Area 51 story was a reporter out of Las Vegas, says it's the best version of Area 51 that there is. It tells exactly what happened, why the government leaked the story, how it got out of control, and it goes through all the military, how I think the thing works, who knows, who's briefing the president. I go through the Canadian government, what the Canadian government was doing in the early days. Their guy was in contact with aliens, he was channeling aliens, the guy who ran the program. My other book, the first book is kind of a historical book, it's sort of in-depth, and what I found was that the people who weren't into UFOs, like my mother and my sisters and stuff, they said, well, we're working on it, we're doing 3 pages a day, but we're having a hard time. And so then I wrote this book, and I made the mistake calling it Alien Bedtime Stories, because I figured, well, if it's too complex, then I'll just make it like bedtime stories, and I'll make 72 stories, and I'll put them in like you can read them before you go to bed, and then we called it Alien Bedtime Stories, and I had this girl whose kids are Aboriginal. There's a lot of Aboriginals where I live, and her kids were half Tibetan, and I figured, great, get your kids, put them in bed, read them a story, and this is what we'll call it. And it's in the children's book section at Amazon.com, and it's doing terrible. Everybody thinks it's a children's book, but it's basically a story where I go through the whole concept about alien healings, all these, there's been whole piles of alien hearings. I have an article on people predicting the future. I have 4 people who saw 9/11 before it happened. I have 1 person who saw the Air France jet coming out of Rio de Janeiro before it happened. These are all experiencers, UFO experiencers. One saw a Korean Air crash, actually got off the flight, and then still had this voice in his head saying it's going to crash. And it wasn't the plane he was going to get on, but he saw the plane crash on TV. So that's what this book is about. It's all sorts of short stories. I do one for every president. I tell the story about Ronald Reagan talking to the alien, which people know the story of him flying. He actually, according to Shirley MacLaine, actually talked to the alien. So I just have a bunch of short stories. So those are the 2 books. And the big one is the consciousness book, which hopefully I say will be out within 6 weeks. And that'll go through all the different types, and it will have the message. It has a whole chapter on what is the message. No doubt about it. The number 1 message is love is the key to the universe.
What's the title of that one?
Well, tentatively it's going to be called, of course now I'm kind of scared what I'm going to call my book, but it was going to be called Inspirations and Downloads Where Good Ideas Come From. So, and it goes through all the different types of remote viewing, and it goes through channels. I have all the channelers, and I sort of explain how this works in this world. And I think it's my most important work. I mean, I'm really excited when I start.
Do you have a mailing list that we could get on and get?
My website is presidentialufo.com. I have some business cards here. Presidentialufo.com, and there's a thing there for updates on the right-hand side that you can see. And I download a lot more material on downloads there than I do presidential stuff now. And I also do, which will be the book after consciousness, I'm going to work on the connection between alien rock and music. I'll name the 24 major musicians who were abducted. John Lennon, head of KISS. I mean, just like, wow, that's just a wild story. And we actually had to pull it out of the download book, all the music stuff, because the book was getting so long that I said, let's pull the music stuff out and put it in a separate book. That's an incredible story. Most of the major musicians have been influenced, the modern ones seem to be influenced by aliens, and then when people told me, oh, it's the devil, it's not aliens, it's the devil. And I was really attacked about it. Then I said, well, my mother's a church organist for 40 years. My sister's played in a religious group that toured the country and stuff. I said, And I'm a musical idiot, but I said, well, I'll check my mother's music from the church. And I went and looked at Bach and Handel and stuff. Same crap, different day. I mean, it was like downloads and all the music from Mozart and all these guys, they were all getting the same downloads and stuff. And they were giving it different things. They were saying it's spirits, there was stuff. So that's why I'm saying I really don't know where it's coming from, but it's coming from somewhere. And it's all through history. We've been getting these sort of downloads, books. I go through all the books. It's incredible how many books have been downloaded. Joe mentioned a few. There's piles of them, and it's just shocking. The one, I'll give you one, and then I guess we'll take another question or quit. The woman who wrote Eat, Pray, Love was 200 weeks or plus on the New York Times bestseller list. Tells the story that she was using this sort of thing, and there was a musician in Los Angeles that she had interviewed, and this guy talks about he's driving down the LA freeway, and all of a sudden, kaboom, he's getting this download, and this music's coming, and he's going, and he looks up and he goes, can't you see I'm on the LA freeway? He said, now, if you want to do this, just wait until I stop. Otherwise, go and talk to Leonard Cohen. And so she tells this story, and she interviews him. So she said, and every author has this problem, where you're in the middle of a book and you're going, this is going to be the worst book that's ever been written. This is just a piece of garbage. You should just quit this right now. And she gets to the point, and Eat, Pray, Love was 200 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. She's saying it's just not going anywhere. It's just absolute garbage. She remembers the story. So she looks at the corner of the room and she says, okay, just want to let you know, I'm working on the book. Now, if you want to come here and help, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. I just want to let you know that I'm working, I'm doing my job. And then she's, boom, suddenly she's got one of the biggest seller books of all times. So a lot of the artists, like artists will understand it, because artists are right-brained. Analytical people are on the other side, aren't, the artistic. But all the artistic people, for example, all abductees, when they asked Roger Lear, who was doing the alien abduction, where he's taking the alien implants out, they said, what's the most common thing that you found with alien experiencers? He said, the only thing I know is they're all right-brained creative people. So you get this over and over again. Like the artists, and the artists you can see, like with this thing I started the thing with, they all have this thing where they're getting inspiration, or they use this thing where Michelangelo used paintbrushes, and where they would do the thing where they would sit there with their paintbrush, and then they would just sort of meditate, and then they would go to sleep, and the paintbrush would fall out of their hand, and then it would sort of make a noise and wake them up. And that's, you go from the waking state through the hypnagogic state into sleep. So as soon as it woke him up, Edison did this. He did it all the time. He would steal balls. He would quickly write down what was in his mind. And then he'd take his little steel balls, and he'd sit in his chair, and he'd go to sleep again. And as he was going through the hypnagogic state, he'd go into sleep, his hand would relax, the balls would wake him up, and he'd write down what was in his mind. And that's where a lot of inventions, and that's what I'm saying. People learn this whole thing that in the hypnagogic state, when you're waking up, or when you're going to sleep, that's when the inventions come. So, but John Lennon told people, this is like channeling. He said, when it happens, you have to make sure you write it down right away. So I asked May Pang, who was with him when he had his UFO experience, which he was abducted, I'm pretty sure. I asked May Pang, did he have a tape recorder by his bed? And she said, oh yeah, he had a tape recorder by his bed. And most big musicians do, because this is when the stuff comes. It comes in the middle of the night, it comes when you're waking up and where you're going to sleep, where suddenly they start getting a song and it comes into their head. And it usually comes within 5 minutes. They can write the whole song, everything in 5 minutes. Yes?
On Friday in Mill Valley, where is the Bengston?
Bengston? Just Google search it too.
Okay.
Look it up.
Okay.
I found it last night.
Yeah, just go William Bengston and Mill Valley.
Okay.
And or the other thing, if you miss that, you can go to the Skeptical, which is like an hour interview with him, which will tell the whole story. He tells the whole story of how this worked, how he picked the students, what kind of results he had. And then his book is called The Energy Cure. He has a book, which you can probably get at the library through interlibrary loan, which is even more detailed. But it's an incredibly sad story that a guy has that much success with cancer. And he said the only time, and here's another thing, he said the only time it doesn't work is if the person's on chemotherapy or radiation. And that's because chemotherapy and radiation is left brain thinking. It's the cancer is evil, we're going to bomb it, we're going to kill it, and it's this war. It's us versus the cancer cell. And he basically says there are no evil cancer cells. They're just productive. They're better versions of ourselves. They're like a booming economy. That's what they are. And what he says, is what this is it basically just tells the cell, come and play with us. Come back in and go back into balance. And he really hates it. He says there's experiments where meditators will be trying to kill cancer cells. And he said, no, that's not how it works. It's this idea that everything has to be in balance, and there really is no cancer cells doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's just very good at what it does. And you have to change the message to the cancer cell. The same as when you work, and this comes to an overall thing where I can't believe science says it, is, and this is one of the downloads I got, was that if you take the human body, it's 100 trillion cells. And the evolutionary model is that everything is in competition with each other. Everything's fighting. If you look at the human body, it is 100 trillion cells that are absolutely working as one, together. And if they don't work as one, you are in big trouble. The same as the brain. You have 100 billion cells, and that's where I got the download. The guy that invented the World Wide Web said they're just neurons. They don't work until you connect them up. And as soon as he said that, I realized, yes, but you also have to have, not just have them connected, but they have to be working together. If your brain cells don't all work together, your brain doesn't work. And so that shows that there's a oneness in the body, in the brain, that everything works as one. The basic rule of the universe is oneness. It's not separation and randomness. Yeah.
I had a couple of those download experiences.
Wow.
And it just felt just like what Feynman described to me, exactly.
Yeah.
And I love the way you put it all together. This is really great. And I wanted to mention, this is a synchronicity for me because I just finished rereading Joseph Chilton Pierce's Cracking the Cosmic Egg.
Okay.
Remember that old
Yeah,
classic?
yeah.
And he talks a lot about this process of creativity and how this works, but of course he didn't call it downloads.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting how he, even back then, was describing this type of action that can happen to us.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Synchronicity is big. It's sort of, especially when it comes to these things about people talking about accidental discoveries. And they say, oh, it's just accidental. What do you throwing that in the book for? It's just accidental. And then I say, well, if psychics can predict the future, and if you get these synchronicity things, it shows that it really is like the future. We're probably in the future, and this kind of thing, that there really is no sort of accidents, that these things are sort of planned. And if you take a look at the Jacques Vallée is probably the most famous in ufology, the most famous synchronicity, where he's working on a thing called the Order of Melchizedek in Los Angeles, this cult in Los Angeles. He's trying to figure this out. He can't figure it out. He's trying to get details on him, and he takes a taxi cab in Los Angeles, and the guy signs the receipt, the taxi cab driver, Melchizedek. And he goes, wow. So he goes in and he says, well, it must be lots of Melchizedeks in Los Angeles. And he looks it up, and it's the only guy in Los Angeles. And he said, well, like, what's the chances? And so then I look it up, and I get a book where the guy writes the story of, and I'm trying to use it for the lecture, writes the whole thing, and he writes it up in his book. He goes out, takes his dog for a walk, comes back, and there's a book sitting on the bed, and he looks at the book, and he opens it up, and it's the Order of Melchizedek. So you have a double one. So you get this sort of synchronicity thing. So I say, if the universe cares about who Jacques Vallée gets for a taxi cab driver, are you telling me it doesn't care about the accidental discovery of penicillin? It absolutely is. Everything is tied together. Everything's linked. Yeah?
Just real quick to add to that, it's the hypnagogic state when you're falling asleep, the
Popic state when you
you're
wake up.
coming out, and that seems to be when these downloads occur, and I've heard this from other authors as well. And if you get that and ignore it, or resist over time, it tends to fade away.
Yeah.
So the key to causing more of it to occur is to, at least one method that I've seen work, is to write it down when it happens. Richard Bach wrote that the human brain is designed to forget about miracles. Right? That's what it's designed to do, to rationalize and make the storyteller element. You write it down, and they develop a practice of remembering and being grateful for those times, and they'll start to flood in.
Yeah. Yeah, and musicians and artists, and I sort of learned to do that too. Like I carry the pad with me all the time, and when it comes, like the first time it happened to me, I wrote it all down, middle of the night, and I didn't turn the light on. I wrote it all down, and then next morning I looked at it, I go, what the hell is that?
Exactly.
And then the one time I actually wrote it down, I could read it, but I still couldn't figure it out. So that's why I think a lot of them use tape recorders, where they talk into a tape recorder. Because even the one I had the whole file and the thing, and I could read the writing. And it just didn't occur to me what it was. But when it came, everything just fit together like nice, like puzzles.
And then what I really want to emphasize to add to that is to remember when those things happen.
Yeah.
Like a year from now, go, wow, I'm really grateful what happened.
Yeah.
Develop a practice of gratitude, because that's the other key along with love to the universe.
I agree. And I was talking to the guy who the song Wipeout in the 1960s, Merrill's Frankhauser. And I was talking to him about creativity. Did you get any songs in the middle of the night and dreams and stuff? And he was telling me all this sort of stuff. And he actually had a UFO sighting in Hawaii, and he tells the story that he writes this song related to the UFO, and he goes, and John Lennon's there. And he's playing this in California. And he says the only time he ever had stage fright, where John Lennon was there, and then he played the song, and then John Lennon said, so where'd that come from? What was the inspiration for that song? And he said, well, I had this UFO sighting and this sort of stuff. And then John didn't talk about UFOs, but he said, this is just like channeling here. It's just like channeling. But make sure you write it down. This is what John told him. Make sure you write it down, because if you don't, he says it loses its freshness.
Right.
And he said, most of the Beatles songs, he said, would have been way better. He said, but we couldn't get into a studio for 2 months. And by the time he got into the studio, the whole thing was gone. And that's why he had the tape recorder and all this kind of stuff. But he said, and I think the most famous song of all time was Stairway to Heaven, which was supposedly automatic writing. And it was the same thing, where they said it was like channeling, that most of music is sort of, you just sit there and you wait for something to happen, and then you're waiting for some sort of inspiration. And so the music thing is really key to.
Yeah, I've got some more examples I'll give you about that.
Wow, I
Like the
appreciate
tune
it.
to the
He's a
Lord-
smart guy.
It's the tune to the Lord's Prayer that we all know.
Yeah.
Came to a guy when his plane ran out of gas. And
Wow.
he heard this, ran to a telephone and sang it.
Wow.
Alfred Haymarlott, who's credited with the tune. Alfred Haymarlott got it from this pilot over the phone. He said, you've got to write this down. He didn't know how to score music.
Yeah.
But he had it in his head.
Wow.
And it came to him when he thought he was going to die.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
so music and
Yeah, there's a big connection. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I'm a musical idiot. Maybe you have to help me with my next
I
book.
know, I'm
I'm just,
idiot too.
I know nothing about music. And it was just because some contactee phoned me up and said, the aliens have told me they're influencing modern musicians. And he happened to mention
But
Neil.
not just modern.
Well, like
That
rock
was-
stars and stuff.
yeah.
But he mentioned Neil Young, who's from my city. So then I sort of got interested, and then I started looking at it, and suddenly I realized, he's right. I mean, there's all these kind of things. Or when people challenge me with the thing about the devil, then I always remind them, "Oh, Little Town of Bethlehem" was downloaded. It didn't come, and lot of Battle Hymn of the Republic, and there's lots of these songs that people think are really great songs that came the same way as the ones that everybody thinks are evil songs from rock stars in the 1960s. Yeah.
I think that you should do your book side.
Okay.
And go.
Okay.
And go home.
Okay.
Moody Blues also had experience with a craft, and he was down there.
Moody Blues actually talked to Colin Andrews. I have the tape. I didn't play it tonight. I have the actual thing. The Moody Blues actually had a UFO abduction experience in 1967. They came to Colin Andrews, who had when I gave the download experience. Colin tells the story that Mike Pinder, who's the head of the Moody Blues and the lead guitarist, came to him after a UFO lecture, crop circle lecture, and said, "We've got to tell you the story." And they said, "We remember before we were born, and we were on a thing, and there was these elder people, and they were telling us that what we were going to do, and we knew before we were born that we were going to be musicians." And Colin said the story was going back and forth, so it was one guy made up. Both guys, tell him this, how we came back on the earth, tell them about that little black hole, how we came. They picked their parents, and they were told they were going to be musicians, and they were going to put lyrics that would help the world. They both claim, absolutely, and they were abducted in '67, but they absolutely claim that they chose to come into this world, which comes down to alien abductions. I firmly believe it's all soul contract. They all agreed to do this, that whatever you do in life, you've agreed to do it, you have lessons to learn, and it's all soul contract. And the Moody Blues is a clear one, where they absolutely say they remember before they were born, they were going to be musicians, and they sold, again, 50 million albums or whatever, big, and sort of, a lot of people like their music as sort of being very spiritual, or that kind of music.
Sammy Hagar also was down there. We went on Howard Stern's show to talk
Yeah,
about his
yeah, he was abducted. I got 24 major musicians that were abducted.
What was the last name you said?
Sammy Hagar.
So where does it come from to the beings who download it to
Well,
us?
but if they're right-brained, they're not left-brained. So their left brain isn't shutting off. So they're tapped into wherever this is coming from.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, they're just tapped in. They're completely right-brained because they can levitate stuff. They can talk telepathically. When I talk to an experience, I say, when the alien talked to you, did you sort of understand what he was saying? Was there any noise in the signal? No. I knew exactly what he was saying. It's like pure, they're talking pure telepathy. So that's why it means they're really really right-brained. They're not just sort of right-brained. Like, we could sort of get out of the left brain. They're completely tapped into whatever's going on. It's all there. And this comes down to the signal issue, that if you're completely right-brained, if your left is completely cut off, your signal is really, really good. And you can tap into the universe.
I
Yeah,
just
Lauren?
want to add to that, it's not really words or anything. It's like
You
it
just know.
almost, yeah, it's almost like it's pictures, but it's not really pictures. It's actually, it goes into your emotional state of the right brain, because it becomes part of your consciousness. It isn't just like you're reading something out of a thing or someone's talking to you. It's so quick and it's so, it becomes part of your soul. It's the best way for me to describe it to you, because it isn't a thought process at all.
Yeah.
And every experiencer you talk to says the same thing. We're just getting to the point as I would say as a group, because there's so many experiencers that meet up every year now in all kinds of places all over the United States. They're really just starting to get a language to describe it. Because up until the last few years, nobody was really talking about it. And that's where Grant's research is so amazing, because we figured out between all of us over at International UFO Congress that was really from about 2010 to 14 that people just started getting the ability to discuss it even. You know, it's just becoming part of our consciousness and our ability to share with each other. So before that, it was just, oh, I was being abducted, they're taking eggs, and you're putting things up my nose, and now we're moving on to that whole stage of, well, what are we communicating with them?
Yeah, it's moving from the fear we bring taken against our will to realizing there's something more behind it than just that kind of stuff.
Just alien babies.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.